Riptide Reckoning. The Fossick Lane Mysteries. Book 4. By Wynne Valentine. Copyright 2026 by Wynne Valentine. All rights reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced in any form or by any electronic or mechanical means, including information storage and retrieval systems, without written permission from the author, except for the use of brief quotations in a book review. Chapter 1. Summer Storm. The summer tourists arrive in waves, and with them comes the kind of chaos that makes the Fossick feel both more alive and more exhausted than any magical surge could manage. They fill petrichor coffee on rainy mornings. They browse my shelves with fingers that don't know how to be gentle. And they ask questions that suggest they believe curio shops are merely antique stores where nothing has ever actually held real power. I watch a woman in a sundress pick up a Victorian locket, genuine, harmless, and ask if it's a good gift for her hostile family. I say nothing. Some people aren't ready to know that objects remember. The shop smells like the earth has been for decades. Lavender and sage, and something rosemary sharp that never quite leaves the memories. I've been running the Fossick for 3 years now, and the scent has become part of how I understand time. Summer brings tourists, autumn brings harvest season and methodical preservation. Winter brings quiet and contemplation. Spring brings renewal. This summer, though, something's different. The scent feels thin, like it's being stretched too far to cover something underneath. Quill shifts against my collarbone, nestled in the familiar fabric of my cardigan. His quills are relaxed. He's calm. The hedgehog recognizes the chaos for what it is. Seasonal, transient, ultimately manageable. I wish I could muster his confidence. Hedgehogs have better instincts than people. Quill can sense shifts in magical current the way people sense temperature changes. If his quills prickle, I should pay attention. The magic in Crabapple Bend has become glitchy this summer in ways that feel intentional rather than natural. Wards are popping, tiny explosions of dissolved energy that leave cold spots in the town square and make the street lamps flicker. The fog, which has arrived with reliable regularity every evening for the years I've been living here, came at 6:14 yesterday and 6:19 the day before. Even the ley line feels uncertain, like something's causing it to stutter and skip. I mentioned this to Bea last week at Petrichor Coffee, and she agreed immediately. She'd noticed the sugar gliders were more agitated than usual, and her familiar is never wrong about magical disturbances. Nolan hasn't mentioned it, which is interesting. He's at the harbor, where water magic is most visible and most volatile, so he would notice instantly if the tidal patterns were disrupted. But when I saw him outside the harbor master's office 3 days ago, bringing him coffee that I absolutely did not make an excuse to deliver, he said everything was normal at the docks. His shoulders were more rigid than normal when he said it, though. I've learned what Nolan's tension means. It means he's holding something back. We've settled into a comfortable kind of partnership, the two of us. We held hands once, 6 weeks ago, during the Tide Pool Festival chaos, and it was deliberate and warm and entirely present tense in a way that made Quill emit a small, satisfied chirp. Since then, we've developed an intricate dance. Nolan brings me coffee twice a week. I drop off harbor charts and weather reports at his office, information I could easily find in the harbor master's public records, but that's not really why I'm bringing them. Quill commutes between us like a spiny shuttle bus, and I'm fairly certain Nolan keeps treats for him in his desk drawer. Premium treats, the kind that cost more than the usual rodent food. What neither of us has done is talk about the hand-holding, or what it means, or why it happened. Nolan's the harbor master, practical and reserved, the kind of man who doesn't waste words. I'm a woman who spends her time reading the emotional residue that objects absorb from human touch. We shouldn't make sense together. But something shifted that day at the festival, something that felt deliberate on both our parts. Since then, we've been circling each other like two people trying to figure out if what we felt was real or a momentary magic-induced response. This is perhaps cowardly. It's definitely safe. I'm cataloging new arrivals to the Fossick's back room, a shipment of dried herbs from a supplier in Portland, sage and dried rose petals, and something exotic I haven't identified yet, when the bell above the shop door chimes. Tourist, probably. Summer tourists always come in during the hottest part of the afternoon, when they realize that Crabapple Bend is actually a working town with actual shops, and not just a series of scenic overlooks. But the man who enters isn't a tourist. He's tall, with the kind of weathered face that suggests he spends time outdoors, salt water weathering, the kind of tan that comes from years spent near an ocean. He moves with purpose, like someone returning to a place rather than discovering it for the first time. But it's something else that catches my attention. His bone structure is familiar in a way that speaks to DNA and inheritance rather than anything I can explain. His eyes are the same shade of gray-blue as the harbor on an overcast day. He looks like Nolan, but roughly 15 years younger, and carrying the weight of someone who ran away and might be thinking about coming back. There's regret in the way he holds his shoulders, and determination in the forward thrust of his chin. He's not someone passing through town. He's someone who's decided something about his life and is still processing whether that decision was a mistake. The man surveys the Fossick with the methodical attention of someone who's been away for a long time and is relearning a place. His gaze lands on me, then on Quill, then moves to the shelves with their jars of dried memory holders and protective stones. "This place is exactly as I remember it," he says, and his voice is Nolan's voice with a different cadence, a different emotional weight. "Is Gretchen still—" He stops. Gretchen died almost 3 years ago. Everyone in Crabapple Bend knows this. Everyone except, apparently, people who've been away long enough that they didn't hear. "She passed," I say gently. The shop transferred to me. "I'm Teddy Vane." "Reid Voss," he says, and the name lands like a piece of the puzzle I didn't know was missing. "I didn't know Gretchen was gone, I'm sorry." Quill's quills prickle slightly. He doesn't bristle, not fully, but he's interested. Hedgehogs are good at reading family connections, and underneath Quill's reaction, I'm reaching out with my own senses, reading the emotional residue that clings to this man. Regret, yes, substantial and genuine. Fear, layered underneath. Love, complicated and tangled with guilt. But nothing that reads as threatening or intentional harm. Just a man carrying his own weight. "You're Nolan's brother," I say, understanding settling into my bones. "I was," Reid says, and something in his tone suggests that whatever happened between him and his family wasn't a simple falling out. "Is he around? Is he still at the harbor?" Outside, the fog starts to arrive. Early. It comes at 6:16, not 6:14 and not 6:19, but somewhere in between. The light in the Fossick shifts from summer bright to something softer and more uncertain. The tourists who are browsing will start to leave soon. The fog makes the streets look less like a picturesque coastal town and more like somewhere with secrets. Quill's quills have shifted slightly, not alarmed but alert. He's sensing what I'm sensing, that something just changed in Crabapple Bend, something fundamental. The arrival of this man, Reid Voss, Nolan's brother, the person who ran away 20 years ago and is apparently running back now, is the kind of catalyst that destabilizes small towns and small relationships in equal measure. Nolan's going to feel this disruption. The harbor will pulse with it. That's how his water magic works, responding to shifts in emotional current like a stone dropped in still water. He's going to notice that Reid is here. He's going to have to face whatever fractured between them 2 decades ago. And something about the way the magic is behaving, stuttering and uncertain, popping wards and arriving at the wrong times, makes me think that Reid's arrival is exactly the kind of catalyst that Crabapple Bend didn't need right now. Chapter 2. Family. Reid comes in looking for Nolan, and I point him toward the harbor with directions that are more detailed than necessary. Turn left to Petrichor Coffee, follow the smell of salt water, watch for the harbor master's office on the dockside. I'm being helpful in that particular way that masks uncertainty. Like if I provide enough information, the meeting between 2 estranged brothers won't explode catastrophically. I don't mention the fact that Nolan still takes his coffee with an extra shot of espresso because he likes the bitterness, or that he sits by the water on Thursdays when the fog is particularly thick. I keep my knowledge of Nolan's habits to myself, both out of discretion and out of a sense that Reid doesn't need to know how much I've been paying attention to his brother. Reid thanks me with genuine warmth and leaves, and I watch through the Fossick's front window as he walks down toward the docks with the gait of someone returning to a place that both feels like home and feels like a threat. His shoulders are slightly raised, like he's bracing for impact. His pace is steady but deliberate. He's not taking the scenic route, not pausing to look at the town he abandoned. He's moving toward Nolan like someone approaching an inevitable conversation. I don't see Nolan until late evening, when he appears at the Fossick just as I'm locking up. The shop's lights are dimmed, the wards are settling into their evening configuration, and I'm in that transition space between day and night when it feels safe to let people in, even though the official hours are over. His face has that quality I've learned to recognize, the look of someone who spent an afternoon absorbing unexpected information and hasn't quite decided how to process it yet. His shoulders are rigid. His hands are clenched in his pockets. His breath is controlled, deliberate. The breath of someone holding themselves together with considerable effort. Even Quill, who usually greets Nolan with a pleased waddle and demands treats, seems to sense that something has shifted and stays pressed against my side, his quills slightly raised. "Your brother's in town," I say, because there's no point in dancing around it. The truth is already hanging between us like fog. "I know," Nolan replies. His voice is controlled, but the control is costing him something. "He showed up at the harbor. I hadn't seen him in 2 decades. 2 decades. 20 years. I do the math quickly and it adds up to something substantial. He was 19 or 20 when Reid left. Nolan would have still been figuring out who he was, still becoming the man who manages the harbor with such quiet competence. Reid would have been making a decision that affected the rest of his life." "How did it go?" I ask, keeping my voice level, aware that questions require vulnerability and that Nolan's still gathering himself. Like 2 people trying to have a conversation when there's 20 years of absence in the way. Nolan moves into the shop and I lock the door behind him without being asked. This is going to be a conversation that needs privacy. He wants to help with the binding renewal. That's what he said. He came back because he realized... He stops, searching for words. He realized the family burden wasn't something that should fall on grandmother alone. I watch Nolan process this. Watch him trying to reconcile the brother who ran away with the brother who's returned. "Do you believe him?" "I don't know yet," Nolan says honestly. "I want to. But people don't just come back after 20 years without something pushing them. And the timing is strange. The renewal's in 4 months. If he'd wanted to help, why now? Why not years ago? There's no accusation in his voice, just exhaustion and confusion and the weight of someone trying to understand family dynamics that aren't straightforward. I move to the small table in the back of the Fossick where Gretchen used to do readings, and I gesture for Nolan to sit. He does, collapsing into the chair like the walk from the harbor took more out of him than physical distance could account for. Tea? I ask. He nods, and I brew chamomile with honey, the kind of practical comfort that doesn't require words to explain. While I'm steeping the tea, I'm thinking about what Georgina said when she visited last week, about family obligations and what's coming, about how the binding renewal requires sacrifice, about how Nolan's going to need support. When I set the cup in front of him, he wraps his hands around it like it's an anchor. My grandmother came to see you, he says quietly. It's not a question. She did. She said nice things about your coffee habits and my potential for discretion. I sit across from him. She also said the renewal was going to be difficult. Nolan closes his eyes. She's dying, Teddy. Not immediately, but the renewal, it killed my grandfather. It nearly killed her the last time 30 years ago, and the cost never decreases. The magical load only gets heavier. If she tries to perform it this fall... He doesn't finish the sentence. He doesn't need to. The implications are already clear. Is that why Reid came back? I ask. Because he knows that? Probably, Nolan says, and there's something in his voice that's between hope and dread. Or maybe he came back because he's realized that whatever he was running from isn't any better on the outside than it was on the inside. Maybe he came back because family obligation doesn't disappear just because you leave. We sit in silence for a moment, and Quill emerges from the back room with his own complicated feelings about Nolan's tension. He waddles over and climbs into Nolan's lap, settling against his thigh with a small, satisfied sound. I meant to tell you something, Nolan says, and his voice is softer now. About the coffee I've been bringing. About all of it. I meant to be clearer about what I want this to be between us. My breath catches slightly. And what do you want it to be? Not something that requires silence, Nolan says. Not something where we're protecting each other by not sharing the hard things. I have a family with obligations that probably will, affect my life in fundamental ways. And I don't want to carry that alone anymore. But I can't do that with someone I don't trust to be honest with me. Not about the difficult things. The words settle between us with weight and intention. He's not asking for something casual. He's asking for partnership. He's asking for me to be willing to share the burden in a way that requires vulnerability from both of us. Okay, I say, and my voice is quieter than I intend. Then we tell each other the hard things. We don't decide what the other person needs to know. We just tell the truth. Nolan nods, and he leans back in the chair with Quill still pressed against his leg. The binding renewal is going to be my responsibility eventually, Teddy. That's what tonight was about. Reid offering to take it on, and me having to explain that the responsibility doesn't transfer to someone who doesn't want it, that it falls to whoever's left standing. And if my grandmother can't do it this fall, then it's me. The word eventually hangs between us with all the weight it carries. Eventually might mean tomorrow. Eventually might mean autumn. Eventually might mean a future where Nolan carries a responsibility that costs people their lives. Then we figure it out together, I say, when it comes. We don't decide things alone. We decide things as a team. For the first time this evening, Nolan's shoulders drop slightly. He nods, and I can see some of the tension draining out of him, replaced by something that looks like tentative relief. Okay, he says. Together. The fog outside settles in as dusk deepens, steady and predictable, like one small piece of the world hasn't completely broken. Nolan finishes his tea. Quill falls asleep in his lap, satisfied with the emotional resolution. And for the first time in weeks, something in Crabapple Bend feels like it's holding steady. Chapter 3. The Council. The town council meeting takes place on a Thursday evening in the council chambers, a wood-paneled room that smells like decades of considered decisions and old carpet that's been cleaned but never fully replaced. The wood is dark with age and polish. The table is long and formal, the kind of furniture that encourages serious conversation and discourages casual remarks. I attend because Bea asked me to. She wanted a second opinion on something she noticed regarding the magical disruptions, and she thought my presence might help frame it in a way that wouldn't sound like paranoia, coming from the person who runs a coffee shop and has a sugar glider familiar. Coming from both of us, the concerns carry more weight. Bea greets me at Petrichor Coffee before the meeting, pressing a to-go cup of chamomile into my hands and squeezing my shoulder. She's wearing the particular expression of someone who's carrying information that feels heavy. "The ley line's degrading faster," she says quietly, away from customer ears. "I've been tracking the glitches with confetti. The sugar gliders are more agitated every day. Something's actively destabilizing the magical grid underneath the town." "I've noticed it too," I say. "The wards are popping with more frequency. The fog's still arriving at irregular times." Bea nods, pressing a second pastry, one of her excellent berry scones, into my hands as if sustenance will help with what's coming. I mentioned it to Desmond at the archive. He's noticed it too in the historical records. There's a pattern to binding degradation, and this feels like the beginning of something significant. She pauses, choosing her words with care. "He's going to be there tonight. He wanted to bring historical context to the conversation, to show the council that this isn't new, but that it's serious." Georgina presides at the head of the council table with the kind of authority that makes you understand how the Voss family has managed to protect Crabapple Bend for generations. She sits with the posture of someone who's accustomed to being listened to. Her hands are folded precisely. Her expression is attentive but reserved. Beside her, Nolan sits with his shoulders held very still, his hands flat on the table in front of him like he's grounding himself through contact with solid objects. His expression is carefully neutral, controlled. He doesn't look at me directly, but I can feel him being aware of my presence. Reid isn't here, which I expected. Some family members don't get invited to official business until they've proven they're staying. The council discusses the binding's renewal. This is the first real time I've heard it named so directly in an official capacity, though Gretchen mentioned it once, years ago, before she realized I was new enough that such talk might frighten me. It's approaching, due in the fall, 4 months away, and the ceremony is an ancient Voss family responsibility. The discussion is technical. Measurements of ley line strength, predictions about the magical load, estimates about the energy cost. Words like sustainable depletion and caretaker capacity and renewal protocols. The language is clinical, designed to obscure what they're actually talking about. Georgina listens to each council member's report with the focused attention of someone who's been hearing these reports for decades. Her expression doesn't change. Her posture remains perfect. When it's done, she sits back slightly and says, "The renewal will be difficult. My husband didn't survive it. But the binding protects us all, and the cost is what the cost is." The room goes absolutely quiet. The kind of silence that follows a statement of fact that everyone understands, but no one wants to say out loud. No one says it, but everyone's thinking it. The cost might be Nolan's life. The cost was probably Reid's father. The cost is the burden that drove Reid out of Crabapple Bend 20 years ago, And that probably explains why he's back now. Because running away doesn't make the binding's needs any less urgent. And family obligation doesn't work that way. Desmond raises his hand from the back of the room where he's been standing quietly. "If I may," he says, and there's the precision of an archivist in his voice. "I've been researching the historical patterns of binding degradation. The magical disruptions we're experiencing, the wards failing, the ley lines stuttering, these aren't random. They follow a pattern that's repeated 3 times in the documented history of Crabapple Bend." He steps forward and displays a ledger, old, meticulous handwriting documenting magical incidents. These patterns occurred approximately 12 months before a deliberate attempt to destabilize the protective magic. Not natural degradation, intentional sabotage. The room shifts. Tension thickens the air like a physical presence. Sabotage means someone is actively working against the binding. Sabotage means this isn't just about renewal. It's about someone trying to break the system entirely. "Do you have evidence of who's responsible?" Georgina's voice is controlled, but I can hear the steel underneath. "Not yet," Desmond says. "But the historical records suggest we should be looking for someone with technical knowledge of wardstone mechanics, someone with access to the Council's archives, someone who understands how the binding works from an engineering perspective." After the meeting, people disperse. Council members heading toward Petrichor Coffee, where B has already prepared extra coffee and fresh pastries. Administrative staff cleaning up papers and filing notes. I notice Ellery Marsh lingering near the archives room, arranging something on the shelves. She's the council assistant, a woman in her 40s with precise handwriting and the kind of focused energy that suggests she cares deeply about doing things correctly. Her nails are trimmed short, her hair is arranged with exactness. Everything about her suggests someone who believes that details matter. I walk over to introduce myself properly. "Teddy Vane. We haven't formally met." Ellery brightens immediately, like she's been hoping for this conversation. "Oh, yes, I've heard wonderful things. I'm Ellery Marsh. I help with council administration." She glances toward the archives with genuine affection. "I've been researching the binding's history, actually. Georgina asked me to compile records going back to the founding. It's fascinating work. All these layers of protection magic, engineered by the Voss family over generations." There's something almost reverent in her tone when she says engineered, like she's talking about architecture rather than magic. Like the binding is less about mystical forces and more about deliberate construction, intentional design, systems that can be understood and possibly improved. She mentions attending every council meeting for the past 2 years, being present for every decision, taking meticulous notes about everything that matters. She's not just assisting, she's studying. "That's impressive dedication," I say, and I mean it. "The binding is worth dedicating yourself to," Ellery replies, and her voice is serious in a way that suggests this isn't casual commitment. "Everything in Crabapple Bend depends on it. If it failed, if the renewal didn't happen properly, everything would break down. The protection we have would just dissolve. All of us would be exposed to forces we can't manage." She looks troubled by the prospect, the kind of worry that comes from understanding exactly what would happen if things went wrong. It's the worry of someone who cares not just about maintaining the system, but about protecting the people it protects. We part ways and I walk home with Quill, who's quiet and thoughtful on my shoulder. He's processing something, absorbing information from the meeting in the way that familiars do. Hedgehogs don't think in words or images. They feel in pulses and emotional currents. Quill's absorbing the weight of what we all just learned. That the binding requires sacrifice. That someone in this town might die to keep us safe. And that something is actively trying to break it from the inside. That someone in Crabapple Bend might be working against the very system that keeps us all alive. The streets are quieter than they were last week. Even the tourists seem to have noticed something's off about the magic, that unconscious sense of unease that draws people away from places where protection is failing. The ones who were here last week are gone. New ones arrive daily, unaware they're walking into a town where something fundamental is destabilizing. The seasonal rhythm is disrupted. The balance is sliding. I think about Ellery's words about the binding being worth dedicating yourself to. I think about what it means to care that deeply about a system that demands human sacrifice. I think about what happens when that care turns into action. When someone decides that the system itself is the problem and needs to be broken. The next morning, I'm opening the Fossick when I notice the ward stone in the town square has cracked. It's not a clean break. It's fractured like something hit it from the inside, the protective energy radiating outward in fractured lines that don't hold any power anymore. The stone looks like a spider web of breaks, delicate and deliberate. When I look closer, I count 4 other stones around the square showing similar damage. They're all cracked in the same pattern, all breaking from the inside out. I walk to the square and touch one gently, just with the tips of my fingers, and pull back immediately. The cold is sharp and wrong, like touching something that's been drained of all warmth and life. The energy signature is inverted. Instead of radiating protection outward, it's pulling energy inward, consuming the magic that should be keeping us safe. It's like watching someone deliberately break something precious from the inside. Whatever's causing the magical glitches is intensifying, pushing harder against the wards, testing the boundaries of our protection like something looking for a way in. Or like something trying to create space for itself by weakening what's containing it. Or like someone trying to show the town that the binding isn't as safe as everyone believes. Chapter 4. Grief. Georgina falls ill on a Saturday. It starts subtly. She doesn't appear at Petrichor Coffee for her usual morning coffee at 8:47, and B mentions that Georgina called to cancel a standing appointment. Her voice sounded strained, B says. Tired, in a way that going back to bed wouldn't fix. At first, it seems like age. She's 75, she's tired. She's probably just sleeping in, resting after weeks of dealing with family tension and the looming binding renewal. Nothing dramatic, nothing that requires concern. But by Wednesday, Restrepo has made a wellness check, and by Thursday, the news is moving through Crabapple Bend like a cold current. Georgina Voss is declining faster than anyone expected. She's not just tired. She's ill in a way that seems systematic, like her body is shutting down systems in a logical sequence. Nolan appears at the Fossick on Friday evening, slipping in just after I've locked the doors for closing. He looks like someone who hasn't slept properly in days. His eyes are red-rimmed. His clothes are wrinkled in a way that suggests he's been wearing the same shirt for multiple days, that he hasn't cared about such things as clean clothes or functioning as a normal person. His shoulders are rigid, that particular tension that means he's holding something back with considerable effort. The way he's standing suggests he might shatter if he relaxes even slightly. When I see him, I move to the tea station without asking. I know what he needs. Chamomile with honey, the kind of practical comfort that doesn't require words to explain. While I'm steeping the cup, Quill waddles over with his own understanding of what's happening. He climbs into Nolan's lap and settles there with a small, satisfied sound, as if his presence alone can anchor someone who's starting to drift. My grandmother is dying, Nolan says quietly, not asking how I know, just stating fact. The decline is happening faster than it should. The doctor said she has maybe 2 months, maybe less. I bring the tea and sit across from him, waiting for him to continue. Some conversations need silence more than words. She doesn't want me to worry about the binding renewal, Nolan continues, running his hands through his hair with frustration. She keeps saying she'll be fine, that the renewal will happen as scheduled, that I don't need to think about what comes after. But Teddy, I can see her body failing. I can feel the magic responding to it. The harbor's been turbulent all week. The water's reacting to her decline like it's reacting to a wound. His voice cracks slightly on the last word. He's trying to hold himself together, trying to be the strong one, trying to carry this burden alone. But partnership means sharing burdens. It means not deciding what the other person can handle. I need to do a reading, I say. Not to confirm that she's dying. I can see that you already know that part. But I might be able to tell if there's something else going on. Something besides age. Nolan looks like he wants to argue, wants to protect his grandmother's privacy. But he nods, understanding that information matters more than discretion right now. I prepare a meal first. Soup made from bone broth and vegetables, bread that's still warm from the oven. The kind of food that doesn't require energy to eat or the will to taste it properly. I bundle Quill into my cardigan and secure a to-go container. Nolan follows me in his truck, and we drive to Georgina's house on Saturday afternoon, aware that I might be overstepping, but trusting my instincts that Georgina won't turn me away. The house is beautiful and cold, the way old houses get when someone's been sick long enough that the warmth's gone out of things. The curtains are drawn, the lights are dim, the air feels stale like it hasn't been exchanged for fresh in days. Georgina answers the door in her robe, and I have to hide my shock at how much she's declined in just 1 week. Her silver hair isn't arranged with her usual precision anymore. It's pulled back in a careless braid that's starting to come undone. Her face has taken on that quality of someone whose body is redistributing resources, shutting down non-essential systems. She's smaller than I remember. "Teddy," she says, and her voice is still commanding even though it's thinner, more fragile. "And Nolan, come in." The kitchen smells like medicine and something underneath it. Something wrong that I can't quite identify. Something that doesn't belong to any illness I've encountered before. A kind of chemical coldness that makes my teeth ache. But Georgina settles at her kitchen table like a queen retaking her throne, despite how much effort the movement costs her. She accepts the soup with the grace of someone who's used to being served, even if she doesn't particularly want to eat it. "I want you to do a reading," she says to me, not phrasing it as a question. She's already decided. I've been suspecting something beyond the normal decline of age. Something that doesn't feel like disease so much as draining. Like something's pulling my energy away in a way that medicine can't address. I reach out and take her hand gently. Skin-to-skin contact, allowing myself to open to whatever emotional and magical signature she's carrying. The psychometric hit comes fast and layered. Decades of duty settling into her bones. Fierce love for her family like armor. Determination that's held her upright through loss and hardship and sacrifice. But underneath all of that, something else. A wrongness so clear it makes me want to pull my hand back. A magical presence that doesn't belong. Something inverted and destructive. Like a ward stone turned inside out, pulling power instead of offering protection. My stomach clenches. I feel sick. I pull my hand back, and Georgina watches my face intently. "You felt something," she says. It's not a question. She already knows. She's been suspecting. "I felt something," I confirm quietly, choosing my words with care. "I felt a magical presence in your system, something inverted, designed to drain instead of protect. It's not poison in the conventional sense. It's wardstone magic inverted. Someone's been using counter magic against you." Nolan's face goes pale. "What do you mean, inverted?" I mean, someone's taken a ward stone, a protective magical object, and reversed its polarity, I say, my mind already working through the implications. Instead of radiating protection outward, it's pulling your grandmother's life force inward, slowly, deliberately. It's designed to mimic natural decline so no one would notice. Georgina nods slowly, like she's been suspecting this all along and was just waiting for someone to confirm it out loud, like she needed a second opinion to make the fear real. All right, I'll need to tell Restrepo. This is beyond medical treatment. This is deliberate harm. Nolan stands abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Who would do this? Who has the knowledge to invert a ward stone like that? Someone with technical understanding of ward mechanics, I say quietly. Someone with access to the binding's inner workings. Someone who's studied how the system functions. Someone who wanted to hurt you, Georgina. Or possibly, I pause, thinking through the implications. Someone who thought they were being merciful. Someone who understood what the binding renewal would cost you. The words hang in the kitchen like fog, heavy and impossible to ignore. Nolan's hands clench into fists. We need to call Restrepo, now! I make the call from Georgina's kitchen, keeping my voice low and professional. When Restrepo arrives, she takes in the situation with the particular attention of someone who's learned to take magical crimes seriously. She listens while I explain the inverted ward stone signature. She nods, understanding immediately what I'm describing. I'll get the medical examiner to run tests, Restrepo says, her hand already moving to her phone, to confirm the magical presence, and I'll start asking questions about who has access to ward stone mechanics in this town, who would know how to invert them. Nolan and I drive back to the Fossick in silence. The weight of what we've discovered settles over us like fog. Not just that Georgina is dying, but that someone is deliberately killing her. Someone who knew how to weaponize the very magic that's supposed to protect us. When we reach the Fossick, Nolan pulls me close before we get out of the truck. He holds me like he's anchoring himself to something solid, something that won't disappear or betray him. Quill presses against both of us, offering his own small comfort. Together, Nolan whispers into my hair. We figure this out together. Together, I agree, holding him as the evening fog rolls in, steady and predictable. The only thing in Crabapple Bend that still feels like it's holding steady. Chapter 5. Suspicion. I meet Restrepo at Petrichor Coffee on Tuesday morning, in a booth far enough from the counter that we can talk without broadcasting our conversation to the entire town. Bee's arranged it deliberately. She checked with Restrepo, set aside the back booth, and now she's keeping the regular crowd away from us. The solidarity of small-town people who understand that some conversations matter more than customer service. She brings us both fresh coffee without being asked and places a small plate of pastries in the center of the table. Let me know if you need anything else, she says quietly, and then she's gone. Her sugar glider confetti perched on her shoulder, offering his own small support through proximity. Restrepo's brought files, which seems either brave or foolish, but she arranges them in front of us with the confidence of someone who's already looked over her shoulder and confirmed no one's paying attention. She has the bearing of someone who's learned to conduct sensitive business quietly. The magical tests came back, Restrepo says quietly, keeping her voice low enough that only I can hear. Confirmation of inverted wardstone magic in Georgina's system. Slow acting, designed to mimic natural organ failure. She's been exposed to it for months. The word months hits like a fist. Not weeks. Months. Which means whoever's been doing this has been patient, deliberate, committed to making sure it looked natural. Which means this isn't a crime of passion or impulse. This is something planned. That's not a medical emergency, I say quietly. That's a crime. Someone's been deliberately draining her life force using countermagic. Yes, Restrepo agrees. She doesn't look surprised by my reaction. Which means this is officially a murder investigation, assuming Georgina doesn't pull through. And assuming she doesn't, we need to identify the suspect. The most obvious suspect walks through our collective consciousness immediately. Reid Voss. He returned to Crabapple Bend just weeks before Georgina fell ill. He hasn't been home in 2 decades. The binding renewal falls to the oldest Voss still capable of performing it, and if Georgina can't, it will fall to Nolan. And if Nolan's incapacitated by grief, or if Nolan refuses to perform it, who handles it? Reid, probably. Reid, who ran away rather than accept the family burden. Reid, who now stands to inherit the very responsibility he spent 20 years avoiding. But there's another possibility that neither of us names yet. Someone else entirely. Someone with the technical knowledge to invert ward stones. Someone with access to the council's archives. Someone with motivation beyond family inheritance. The evidence points toward Reid, Restrepo says, confirming what we're both thinking. But then she adds, though assumptions aren't evidence. Evidence and truth are different things. I need to talk to him. I need to understand his timeline, his access to Georgina, his motive. When? I ask. Today. Tonight, possibly. I wanted you to know first. She leaves, and I'm sitting in petrichor coffee with my coffee going cold, my mind circling back to that handshake with Reid in the Fossick. The psychometric reading I got when he introduced himself. Regret. Fear. Love. Not malice. Not the emotional signature of someone planning to poison their grandmother slowly over months. But people are good at lying. They're good at constructing versions of themselves that hide the rot underneath. I'm not infallible. My psychometric readings show me emotional truth, but they don't show me actions. They don't show me intent beyond the current moment. They don't show me what someone's capable of doing over months of patience and deliberate planning. Bea returns to the booth with a fresh pot of coffee, her expression tight. How bad? She asks quietly. Murder, I say. Using inverted wardstone magic, slow, deliberate, designed to look natural. Bea sits down heavily. Confetti's quills prickle with distress. Who? That's what Restrepo's trying to figure out. I find Reid at the archive with Desmond, exactly where I saw him last week. He's reading Old Town records about the binding, water damage documents that Desmond's been preserving and digitizing with meticulous attention. Reid looks up when I approach, and something in his face shifts. He's recognized something in my expression that tells him this isn't a casual visit. The casual visit stopped when his grandmother fell ill. Can we talk? I ask, and Desmond has the grace to excuse himself quietly. I'll be in the back room if you need me. He understands that some conversations need privacy, even in archive rooms where secrets live in documents. Reid stands. He's still wearing the weight of someone who ran away 20 years ago, but it's not the weight of guilt, not primarily. It's regret. It's the heaviness of a man who's starting to think that running away was a mistake, and that coming back might not fix it. Reid, when did you return to Crabapple Bend? I ask, my voice steady and professional. His eyes narrow. 6 weeks ago. Why? He's already starting to understand where this is going. And in those 6 weeks, how often have you seen your grandmother? Almost every day, he says, since I got here. I've been trying to apologize for leaving. I've been trying to reconnect, trying to explain why I ran. His hands clench slightly. Why are you asking? Did something happen with Grandma? I take his hand. Brief, professional, skin-to-skin contact that opens me to whatever emotional and magical residue he's carrying. The psychometric reading comes clear and sharp and immediate. Regret, layered thick throughout his entire being, yes. Fear running underneath like a current, yes. Love, absolutely. The kind of love that comes from family obligation and genuine affection tangled together, impossible to untangle. But also something new beneath all of that. Awareness. He knows something's wrong. He knows Georgina's declining, and he's blamed himself for coming back, like his presence destabilized something that was stable before, like his arrival triggered everything that followed. That guilt is heavy and real. What I don't feel is the intention to harm. What I don't feel is the coldness of someone who would deliberately weaponize magical objects against their grandmother. What I don't feel is the emotional signature of someone who would slowly drain another person's life force while sitting across from them, watching them decline. What I feel is someone caught in grief and circumstance, and the terrible luck of being present when something terrible happens. What I feel is innocence, complicated and genuine. I release his hand and step back, giving him space to process. Your grandmother is sick, I say, my voice quiet and measured. Really sick. And there's reason to believe it's not natural illness. Someone's been using inverted wardstone magic against her, deliberately draining her life force. Reid's face goes white. All the color drains like someone's pulled a plug. You think He stops. He understands immediately what people are going to think. He's the returning son, the suspicious sibling, the man who ran away from responsibility and is now conveniently present when his grandmother falls ill. I didn't. Teddy, I came back to help. I came back because I realized the family burden wasn't her burden to carry alone. I believe you, I say, and I do based on what I felt. But belief and proof are different things in criminal investigations, and Restrepo will need more than my psychometric reading to clear him as a suspect. She'll need facts, timelines, corroboration. Tell me everything about your access to your grandmother. Everything you've done. Every conversation you've had. Every meal you've eaten at her house. Every object you've touched. Because someone used counter magic to hurt her. And right now, you're the most obvious person who could have done it. I need to help you eliminate you as a suspect before this becomes official with the sheriff. Reid sits down hard in the nearest chair. He looks like someone whose homecoming just became a nightmare instead of a homecoming. Like all his hopes and apologies have turned into something that looks like guilt from the outside. Okay, he says quietly. Tell me what I need to do. I'll tell you everything. I spend the next 2 hours documenting Reid's movements, his conversations with Georgina, his presence at her house. Desmond joins us, offering his perspective on what Reid's been doing at the archive. When I'm done, I have a solid timeline that suggests Reid couldn't have been at Georgina's house during many of the times the counter magic would have been applied. Not conclusive proof, but enough to raise reasonable doubt. I take the documentation to Restrepo before she officially interviews Reid. She studies it thoroughly, noting the gaps, the corroboration, the timeline conflicts. This doesn't clear him entirely, Restrepo says, but it complicates the straightforward narrative, which means I need to look elsewhere as well. I think about Ellery Marsh at the council meeting, talking about the binding with such reverence, about her meticulous research into how the system works, about her perfect knowledge of wardstone mechanics. But I keep that suspicion to myself. Suspicion isn't evidence, and Restrepo's already proven she's thorough enough to find the truth without me pointing her in directions that might be wrong. The fog rolls in at dusk as Restrepo and I stand in the Fossick's back room, Quill pressed against my side with his own complicated feelings about suspicion and murder, and the way small towns can hide dark intentions underneath surfaces that look peaceful. "We'll find who did this," Restrepo says quietly, "and we'll make sure they answer for it. That's what justice is. Not assumptions, investigation, facts, truth." I nod, wanting to believe her. Outside, the summer light fades into evening, and Crabapple Bend settles into the knowledge that someone among us is a killer. Chapter 6. The Inversion. Georgina Voss dies on a Tuesday at 3:47 in the afternoon, with Nolan holding her hand in a hospital bed 2 towns over. The monitor flattens. The machines that have been keeping track of her heartbeat and breathing all go silent. I hear about it from B, who heard it from Restrepo, who's already begun treating it as a confirmed murder case. Because when someone has inverted Wardstone magic in their system, when the magical signature confirms deliberate counter-magic, it stops being an illness. It becomes a crime. The town goes quiet in the way that only death can make things quiet. The summer tourists thin out as if they can sense that something's wrong, that the wards protecting Crabapple Bend are no longer being reinforced by a woman who's held them steady for decades. She was the center that everything rotated around. Now that center is gone. Stores close early. Petrichor Coffee stops serving the expensive seasonal drinks and shifts to quiet comfort beverages. The town moves into a quieter rhythm. Everything shrinks into grief and uncertainty. Nolan doesn't come to the Fossick. He doesn't appear anywhere as far as I can tell. He's somewhere private, mourning the loss of someone who clearly meant the world to him, and who also meant responsibility and burden, and a weight that's now fallen entirely on his shoulders. He's grieving and inheriting at the same time, and those two things don't fit together well. I see Reid once, walking through town with the gait of someone who's been cleared as a suspect by timeline and corroboration, but not absolved in the court of public opinion. People watch him pass. They're wondering. He's still the obvious choice, still the person who benefits most if Georgina's dead, even if he didn't kill her. The town's collective suspicion is a weight he's going to carry for a long time, and the unfairness of it settles over Crabapple Bend like a second layer of grief. Restrepo opens the investigation fully. She's methodical and thorough. She doesn't leap to conclusions based on circumstantial evidence. She builds cases with precision, checking and rechecking her work. She's earned the town's trust through years of competent, quiet law enforcement. Now she's going to use that trust to find the truth. She takes Georgina's body for an official autopsy. The preliminary tests confirm what I already sensed. Inverted Wardstone magic, slow acting, designed to look like natural decline. The question now is how it was administered and by whom. I volunteer to do a psychometric reading at Georgina's house. Restrepo brings me there on a Thursday, and the house is different now. Empty in a way that goes beyond just absence. It's the emptiness of a place where someone's recently died, where the function of the space has shifted from living to grieving. The air feels still and heavy. The light coming through the windows feels wrong, like it's having trouble reaching into the corners. This house held a person for 75 years. Now it holds only what she left behind. Objects that remember her. Spaces that still feel her presence even though she's gone. I touch Georgina's favorite chair, and the reading comes clear and sharp. Decades of sitting here, sipping tea, making decisions that affected the entire town. I feel the weight of her presence settling into the fabric. Beneath that, the slow encroachment of inverted Wardstone energy, like corruption seeping through every comfortable afternoon. like counter magic, layering itself deliberately, intentionally, over months. And woven through it all, a presence. Someone visiting regularly. Someone who knew how to make tea exactly the way Georgina liked it. Someone who would sit across from her with intention and care. Someone who would leave behind emotional impressions that are complicated and layered. Devotion, certainty, grief in advance, like mourning something you know is about to end, like preemptive sorrow, like someone who believed they were being merciful. I moved toward the shawl draped across the back of Georgina's favorite chair. It's hand-knitted, intricate work, cream-colored yarn with subtle patterns woven through the fibers, the kind of garment that takes months to complete. The fabric looks loved, worn soft by constant use. Georgina wore it every day, I realize. Every single day. The shawl carries the shape of her shoulders, the warmth of her body, the weight of her relying on it like protection against the world. When I touch the shawl, the psychometric reading hits like cold water plunging through my entire nervous system. Months. Not days, not weeks, months of accumulated magical intention woven into every fiber. I feel the knitting needles, the patient click-click of them working rhythm into thread. Hands moving with precision and purpose, creating patterns that are beautiful to look at, but serve a darker function beneath the surface. And underneath the technical work, I feel something worse. Tears falling onto yarn. Actual tears. Emotional weight so heavy it condenses into visible salt water, dropping from cheeks onto cream-colored fiber, staining the work with grief and certainty. Ward runes traced into the stitching patterns. Not visible to the naked eye, but unmistakable to my psychometric sense. Ancient protective symbols rotated backward, inverted, their defensive purpose twisted into something that drains instead of defends. Hours of careful stitching, each rune woven into the fabric with mathematical precision, creating a network of reversed protective magic that radiates outward constantly, invisibly, pulling life force with the inevitability of tide. The intention is overwhelming in its clarity. This wasn't a single poisoning event. This was a weapon disguised as a gift of love. This was months of preparation, months of standing at a knitting needles and crafting an instrument of death that looks like a grandmother's blanket. This was intimacy weaponized, the shawl pressing against Georgina's skin hour after hour, day after day, week after week. The inverted ward stones embedded in the fibers draining her life force through constant contact. Slow, patient, designed to look like natural aging instead of magical assassination. And underneath it all, the emotional signature, the same complicated devotion I sensed in the chair, the same preemptive grief, the same absolute certainty that this was mercy. The hands that knitted this shawl knew they were creating death. The mind that designed these patterns understood exactly what they would do. The heart that chose cream-colored yarn, Georgina's favorite color, wanted the victim to love the weapon that was slowly killing her. I pull my hand back from the shawl like it's burning. My heart is racing. Sweat cools on my forehead. I'm breathing hard, grounding myself back into my own body, separating my nervous system from the psychometric connection before it overwhelms me completely. There's something woven into the fabric, I tell Restrepo, keeping my voice steady and professional even though my hands are shaking. Ward runes, inverted protection magic embedded into the stitching, months of intentional work. Months of someone knitting destruction into something beautiful. Months of planning this. Restrepo's expression shifts. She's already moving closer to the shawl, already looking at it with new understanding. The emotional signature. I continue, my voice barely steady, is not hate. It's not anger. It's someone who believed they were helping. Someone who cared about Georgina deeply enough to spend months carefully crafting a weapon that would feel like a gift. Someone who wove tears into yarn and called it love. Restrepo writes this down with a frown. That doesn't narrow it down much. I know, but I'm not reading murderous intention in the traditional sense. I'm reading sacrificial intention. Someone who thought they were sparing her from something worse. Someone who made a choice they believed was merciful, even if it was actually murder. Someone who knew her well enough to know she would wear this shawl every day. Someone who understood that constant skin contact would allow the inverted magic to work its way through her system slowly, invisibly, looking like natural decline. That's when Restrepo tells me about the binding renewal in detail, about how it cost the caretaker dearly, physically, emotionally, spiritually, in ways that historical records document thoroughly. About how Georgina's husband died from performing the ceremony. About how Georgina herself nearly died the last time, 30 years ago. About how the responsibility hasn't changed in 2 centuries and the cost hasn't gotten smaller, even as people have become more fragile and the magical load has grown heavier. Someone might have decided Georgina didn't need to survive long enough to perform the renewal, Restrepo says quietly. Someone who thought they were being merciful. Someone who understood exactly what the binding renewal would do to her body, her spirit, her life. Someone who cared about her enough to think murder was kinder than letting her continue. I think about Ellery Marsh, talking about the binding with such reverence, such understanding. I think about her meticulous notes, her focused attention to every council meeting, her obvious knowledge of the binding's mechanisms and its costs. I think about how someone who understands a system that thoroughly might decide that system needed to be broken. I think about how someone who loves a person might decide that person didn't deserve the suffering the system demands. I think, I say slowly, you should look at who had access to Georgina on a daily basis, who made her tea, who visited her regularly and would have had no reason to be questioned when they were in her home, who was trusted enough that Georgina wouldn't suspect anything, who understood the Wardstone mechanics well enough to invert them, to transform something meant to protect into something that destroys. Who had the patience to spend months knitting a beautiful shawl while embedding death into every fiber? Restrepo's expression shifts. She's already thinking the same thing. She knows who I mean. We leave Georgina's house as the fog starts to arrive, rolling in at dusk, precise and predictable despite all the stuttering it's been doing for months. The magic is settling now. The chaos of Georgina's decline is over. The wards in the town square are still cracked and failing. The binding's caretaker is dead. And someone in Crabapple Bend just became a murderer, whether they meant to be one or not. I go to Petrichor Coffee after leaving Georgina's house. Bea is still serving evening customers, but when she sees my face, she sends them away gently and locks the door. She brings me tea without asking, chamomile with honey, the comfort beverage that means deep conversations. Confetti climbs into my lap alongside Quill, and both familiars offer their own small support through proximity and warmth. It's someone we know, I say quietly. Someone who loved Georgina. Someone who understood the binding renewal would kill her. Someone who decided mercy looked like murder. Someone who spent months knitting a weapon disguised as a gift. Bee's hands clench around her mug. That doesn't make it right. No, I agree. But it makes it complicated. It makes it a crime committed by someone we might sympathize with, and that's the hardest kind of truth to carry. Outside, the evening deepens into night. The fog settles in with twilight precision, right on schedule. And in the quiet of petrichor coffee, with the weight of murder sitting heavy between us, Bea and I sit together in the knowledge that justice doesn't always mean simple answers. Sometimes it means finding the truth about someone we care about, and then having to turn them in anyway. Chapter 7. The Wait. The investigation narrows over the course of a week. Restrepo's methodology is systematic. Access, opportunity, knowledge. Who had regular access to Georgina? Nolan, obviously. Reid, since his return. Ellery Marsh, the council assistant who brought her tea during working sessions and visited her in the evenings to discuss council business. One of the volunteers who helped with Georgina's garden. The nurse, who checked on her once a week. But when Restrepo runs deeper, certain facts emerge that complicate the obvious suspects. Nolan's movements can be corroborated by harbor staff for most days. Reid's been relatively open about his comings and goings, and Desmond's confirmed that Reid was at the archive for significant chunks of time doing research. The nurse has been employed for only 2 months, less time than the inverted Wardstone magic's been in Georgina's system. Which leaves Ellery Marsh, the council assistant who's been in her position for 3 years. The woman who's been present at every council meeting, who's meticulously documented the binding's history, who understands exactly what the renewal costs and exactly what it would do to whoever performed it next. Restrepo brings me the information one afternoon at the Fossick, in the back booth where Bee's made sure we have privacy. I'm working the register when Restrepo arrives, and I hand off to Bee with a silent nod. She brings us both coffee and a plate of scones without being asked, understanding that some conversations require sustenance. Ellery's been paying visits to Georgina for the past 6 months, Restrepo says quietly. They're not documented in any official sense, but neighbors saw her going in and out. The visits increased in frequency about 4 months ago. And Ellery has chemistry and magical knowledge. She took courses at the community college while working full-time, specifically in Wardstone mechanics and counter-magic theory. She'd know how to invert a Wardstone. She'd know how to embed inverted ward runes into fabric, how to weave protective magic into yarn and make it drain instead of defend. Why would she do it? I ask, though I think I already know the answer. Because, Desmond says, and I realize he's arrived and settled at the booth beside us without me noticing, his expression tired. Because Ellery understands what the binding costs. She's read the entire documented history. She knows it kills or debilitates every caretaker. She knows it killed Georgina's husband. And she knows that Nolan would be the next to perform it if Georgina couldn't do the renewal. Desmond looks older than he did last week. The knowledge of murder in a small town ages you. It settles into your face like dust that can't be washed away no matter how many times you try. He's been reading about the binding for his entire life as the town archivist. He's been cataloging the cost. Now he knows that cost extends to murder. She wanted to spare Georgina the renewal, I say, and possibly prevent Nolan from having to perform it. To protect him. Yes, Desmond confirms. If Georgina died before the renewal, the responsibility would fall to the next eligible Voss. Nolan might refuse on grounds of grief, or Reid might be forced to step in, and Reid's run away from the family burden once already. If anyone could refuse the binding renewal, it's Reid. The logic is twisted and meticulous. The logic is someone who cared deeply about people and made a decision that seemed merciful, that seemed like it would prevent greater suffering, without understanding that murder is still murder, without understanding that the systems that exploit people don't disappear just because you eliminate the person performing them, without understanding that breaking one part of an interconnected magical system can have cascading consequences that affect everyone. without understanding that the binding doesn't go away just because the designated caretaker dies. How did she do it? I ask. Restrepo flips through her notes. According to her workshop at home, Ellery inverted personal ward runes that were originally meant to protect Georgina. She reversed the magical polarity, made them drain instead of defend. Then she spent months, we're talking April through August at least, hand knitting a shawl with those inverted runes woven into the stitching patterns. Wardstone magic embedded into fiber, creating a constant draining effect. Over months, as Georgina wore the shawl every day, the inverted energy built up in her system, slowly consuming her life force. The beauty of it is that it looks like a gift, a piece of wearable art that someone made with their own hands, something to be treasured. The cruelty of it is in the intimacy. Ellery didn't use poison or violence. She used magic and trust, and the fact that Georgina welcomed her presence. She used knitting needles and yarn and tears to create a weapon that looked like love. She turned protection into destruction through nothing but meticulous research and the kind of careful dedication that knows exactly how to break things from the inside, literally woven into the fabric itself. Has she confessed? I ask. Not yet, Restrepo says. But we're bringing her in for official questioning tomorrow. The evidence is substantial. The motive is documented. We found journals in her apartment, years of notes about the binding's cost, calculations about what would happen if Georgina performed the renewal, plans for how to prevent it. Bea returns to refill our coffee, and I can see her processing the information. Processing that someone she's served coffee to, someone who sat in petrichor coffee like a normal person, is a murderer. That the systems that seem safe contain people capable of extraordinary violence, justified by extraordinary love. She was trying to save them, I say quietly. Nolan and Reid and everyone else the binding would consume. She was trying to break the system that demands human sacrifice. She was trying to commit murder, Restrepo says, and her voice is steady. The method doesn't matter. The motive doesn't change what she did. She killed Georgina Voss using inverted wardstone magic, and she's going to answer for that. I want to argue that justice is complicated, that motive matters, that someone who kills out of love deserves a different kind of consideration. But Georgina is still dead. Nolan is still grieving. Reid is still carrying the weight of suspicion. And the binding renewal is still approaching, still demanding its sacrifice, regardless of whether Georgina's alive to perform it or not. The investigation proceeds quietly. Restrepo's patient. Ellery won't run. She's not the type to panic or flee. She's the type to stand and defend her actions, to explain the reasoning that seemed so clear when she was making the decision. The type to believe, even now, that what she did was mercy disguised as crime. Restrepo doesn't move on Ellery immediately. Instead, she confirms the magical signature through a third-party maid she brings in from outside Crabapple Bend. She catalogs the access through witness statements and timeline documentation. She builds her case methodically, the way a good sheriff builds cases when she wants conviction to stick. She's thorough in a way that leaves no room for reasonable doubt. And Reid stays in Crabapple Bend, walking through the town like a ghost, aware that he's cleared as a suspect, but understanding exactly what his presence means, that the binding renewal now falls to him, whether he wants it or not, whether he's ready or not. He's the only eligible Voss who's physically present and capable of performing the ceremony. The responsibility has shifted from his grandmother to him, and there's nothing he can do to refuse it. The weight of this is settling on the town like fog, heavy, visible, impossible to ignore. Summer is ending. The season of change is coming, and everything that was supposed to be solid is starting to crack. I finish my shift at the Fossick and walk home with Quill pressing against my neck. He's quiet and thoughtful, absorbing the weight of what we all know. Someone we know is a killer. Someone we probably sympathized with, given the opportunity. Someone who committed murder out of love. And the truth about that sits heavy in my chest, in a way that no amount of tea or comfort can fix. Chapter 8. The Fracture. Nolan comes to the Fossick on a Friday evening, a week after his grandmother's funeral. I'm closing up, doing the end-of-day inventory, checking the wards, the usual routines that keep the shop functioning and my mind otherwise occupied. The work is mechanical and steady, the kind of work that keeps you from thinking about things that matter. Quill is curled in his bed in the back room, having had enough of human drama and family crisis for one day. He's retreated into Hedgehog silence, and I don't push him. Nolan looks like someone who hasn't slept properly in longer than a week. His eyes are red-rimmed and swollen. His clothes are wrinkled in a way that suggests he's been wearing the same shirt for multiple days, that he hasn't cared about such things as clean clothes or functioning as a normal person. His body is wound tight, that particular tension that means he's holding something back with considerable effort, that if he relaxes even slightly, everything contained will spill out. His breathing is measured, controlled, the breath of someone who's learned to live on the edge of losing control. "We should talk," he says. His voice is rough. It sounds like it's been used for nothing but formal statements in official conversations, and now it's breaking on casual speech. "All right," I say, and I lock the shop door, keeping him inside rather than inviting him to stay. This needs to happen here, in the Fossick, where Gretchen taught me that some conversations matter more than others. "You said we'd figure things out together," Nolan says without preamble. His words are clipped, deliberate, like he's been practicing them. "But when the crisis came, when it mattered most, you made decisions alone. You did the reading on my grandmother. You brought information to Restrepo. You investigated my brother. You did all of it without telling me what you were discovering." "I was trying to be methodical," I say. "I was trying to get facts before presenting theories." "You were protecting me," Nolan interrupts, and there's something in his voice that's between anger and pain. "You decided that what I was going through was too heavy for me to also carry the truth. You decided I needed to be shielded from the investigation, from the information, from the process of understanding what was happening to my family." "That's not fair," I say, but he's already moving past my objection. "You did exactly what the binding does," Nolan continues, pacing the small space of the Fossick like the walls are too close. "You took a burden that should have been shared, and you carried it alone, supposedly for my protection. You decided you were strong enough to handle the weight, and I wasn't. You replicated the exact pattern of isolation that's been destroying my family for generations." The accusation hits harder than I expected. He's right. I made a choice, believing it was protective, and what I actually did was replicate the exact pattern he's been trying to escape. "You're right," I say quietly. "I should have told you everything, as I found it out, and I'm sorry I didn't." "I need you to understand something," Nolan says, and his voice is quieter now but more dangerous for it. "The binding renewal will probably kill me. Not maybe, probably. It killed my grandfather. It nearly killed my grandmother. The historical records are clear. The caretaker performs the ceremony, and the caretaker's life expectancy drops significantly. Some caretakers don't survive the ceremony itself. Some survive and then decline rapidly. My family has been managing this for centuries by rotating the responsibility between different family members. But there's only me now. There's only me and Reid. And Reid didn't choose this burden. He tried to escape it, and I don't blame him for that." He stops pacing and looks at me directly, and the pain in his eyes is raw and immediate. I wanted to have something before that happened. I wanted to have you. I wanted that to mean partnership, real partnership, where we face the hard things together. I wanted that to mean you trusted me with difficult truths, even the scary ones, especially the scary ones. I do trust you, I say. Not enough, Nolan replies. Not the way I need you to. Not the way partners trust each other when everything's about to change. He's quiet for a moment, and I can see him making a decision. I'm going to perform the binding renewal. I'm going to do it because it needs to be done, because the town depends on it, because my family's been responsible for it for generations. I'm going to do it knowing it might kill me. And I needed to know that when I made that choice, you were making it with me, that you understood what was at stake, that you weren't trying to protect me from the reality of what that means. Nolan, I start, but he holds up a hand. I need time, he says. I need time to figure out how to carry this. And I need to know that the person I'm trying to build something with isn't going to try to protect me from hard truths. I need someone who can be honest with me, even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult. I can do that, I say. I want to do that. I know you do, Nolan says, and his voice is gentler now, though still sad. But right now, I need space. I need to grieve my grandmother. I need to understand what Reid's planning to do about the renewal. I need to make peace with the fact that I'm probably going to die from the magic that's supposed to protect this town. And I can't do any of that while also trying to navigate partnership and prove that I can trust you and figure out if I can be the kind of person you need me to be. He moves toward the door, and I stand in his way without thinking about it. Are we breaking up? I ask quietly. We're pausing, Nolan says, and it's not really better, but it's not quite as final. We're acknowledging that we both need something different right now than what we're giving each other. You need to learn how to trust people with hard truths. I need to learn how to carry my family's burden without isolating myself. Those are things we need to work on separately before we can work on them together. He leaves. He walks out of the Fossick without looking back, and the door closes with a finality that suggests this is more than just an argument. This is the moment where something shifts fundamentally, where the deliberate dance we've been doing runs up against the real stakes of caring about someone who's carrying something this heavy. I stand in the empty shop, and Quill emerges from the back room with a burst of distress so sharp that my collarbone aches. He presses against my neck, his quills flat with agitation, and I can feel exactly how deeply this matters to him. Quill has only ever had 3 humans in his life. Me, Nolan, and before that, Gretchen. He doesn't bond lightly, and now one of the bonds that sustains him has fractured. I throw myself into work to avoid the ache. I pull the files from my reading of Georgina's house, and I review what I sensed. The emotional signature of her poisoner, complicated and layered and devoted. Someone who cared about her deeply and made a choice that seemed merciful. That's when I think to check the council office more thoroughly. Restrepo's been methodical, but she might have missed something. And if I'm going to understand how this happened, if I'm going to understand what pushed Ellery Marsh to commit murder, I need to know what she knew. I used the backdoor key that Gretchen gave me years ago, the one for emergencies and important business. Ellery's desk is organized, meticulous, and filed in a way that suggests someone who believes in documentation and order. I find the notes about the binding's inefficiency, calculations about energy distribution, a vocabulary that sounds less like record-keeping and more like engineering, calculations for countermagic, for inverted ward stones, for the systematic deconstruction of protective magic. But there's also something else. A letter, deliberately written, dated 4 months ago. It's addressed to Georgina, and it's never been sent. I know what the binding costs, the letter reads. I know what it will cost you in the fall. I know what it cost your husband, and what it will cost Nolan if you're not here to prevent him from performing it. I've studied the system. I understand how it works, and I've found a way to spare you. Let me help. Let me make this easier. Let me preserve your life so you don't have to spend it fueling ancient magic. It's a confession. It's a love letter written by someone who cared deeply enough to commit murder. And it's written in the language of someone who genuinely believed that what they were doing was mercy. I take the letter to Restrepo the next morning, and the investigation closes 3 days later. Ellery Marsh is arrested for Georgina Voss's murder. She doesn't fight it. She doesn't deny it. She simply accepts the consequences of a choice made with the best intentions and the worst possible outcome. The town settles into the knowledge that someone among us is a killer. Someone we've served coffee to. Someone who sits quietly and takes notes and loves deeply and decided that love could justify murder. The philosophical questions hang heavy in the air, about mercy, about sacrifice, about the systems that demand blood and the people who try to break them. And I'm left standing in the Fossick, alone except for Quill, with a fight unresolved and a man I care about carrying a burden that I'm not sure anyone can help him share. The shop is dark except for the security lights. The wards are settling into their evening configurations. The town outside is settling into autumn approaching, toward the fall-binding renewal that will probably cost Nolan his life. Quill climbs into my lap as I sit at the back table, and we sit together, in the knowledge that sometimes partnership means accepting that you can't fix everything. Sometimes it means respecting that someone needs to carry their burden alone for a while. Sometimes it means loving someone enough to let them go, even when the going might be permanent. The fog rolls in at dusk, steady and predictable. It's the only thing in Crabapple Bend that still feels safe and reliable, and I'm not sure if that's comforting or terrifying. Chapter 9. The Inverted Stone. The grove in Brackenwood smells like ancient cedar and turned earth. The kind of scent that settles into your clothes and reminds you for days afterward that you've touched something old. The fog is particularly thick here today, arriving earlier than expected instead of its usual predictable time. That's always the first sign that something's disrupted the ley line's precise rhythm, that something fundamental is out of balance. Nolan's waiting for me at the edge of the grove where the magical current pulses strongest. And the moment I see his face, I know we've found something significant. His shoulders are rigid with tension, the kind that comes from holding terrible knowledge without being able to act on it. His hands are clenched so hard the knuckles are white, and he's been clenching them long enough that small crescent indentations mark his palms. "Show me," I say, moving into the grove beside him. Quill shifts on my shoulder, his quills settling into an alert stillness that means he's already sensing what we're about to discover. Nolan steps aside, and I see it immediately. The stone is roughly the size of my torso. Marble, carved with patterns so intricate they hurt to look at directly. Medieval protective sigils, the kinds that haven't been inscribed in 200 years. But it's not the carving that makes my breath catch. It's what the stone is doing. The protective magic that should flow outward, reinforcing the binding, instead spirals inward like water draining down a sink. It's beautiful. That's the disturbing part. The inversion is technically perfect, each angle precise, each magical vector aligned with mathematical accuracy. Someone didn't destroy this ward. Someone rewrote it entirely, rotating its purpose backward without breaking the structure underneath. How long? I ask, already touching the stone precisely, skin against cool marble. The psychometric reading hits like cold water, submerging my entire nervous system. Hands, precise, deliberate, grieving. Someone crying while they worked, hands shaking with the weight of intention. Absolute certainty beneath everything, the kind that doesn't come from doubt or fear, but from conviction so deep it becomes its own form of armor. This person knew they were right, knew they were helping, knew that their sacrifice meant saving someone else. The emotional signature is devotion layered with sacrifice. Months of study, months of practice, months of holding an inverted pattern in their mind while their hands worked the marble. And underneath it all, unmistakable and heartbreaking, the same feeling I sensed in Georgina's shawl, the same emotional fingerprint, tears, certainty, the weight of believing you're saving someone by destroying them. It's Ellery, I whisper, pulling my hand back. The marble is still warm, as if she just left. Nolan nods slowly, and I watch his shoulders drop slightly. Not relief, but the settling of something he's been tensing against. I thought so. I hoped I was wrong. The inverted stone is pulling energy with the patience of something that could run indefinitely, draining the binding with the inevitability of tide. Slow, methodical, never dramatic. Just pulling. Always pulling. Months of precise extraction. Months of weakening the protective structure that keeps Crabapple Bend safe. And the skill required, the understanding of both protective magic and its inversion, narrows everything to one person. Someone who studied the binding not to strengthen it, but to understand its architecture so thoroughly she could dismantle it from the inside. We have to disarm it, I say, before she realizes we found it, before she has time to adjust her plan or accelerate the draining. If we disconnect the inversion while it's at this charge level, the energy release will spike through the entire binding, Nolan says, speaking precisely, like he's explaining something he's studied extensively. It could destabilize everything. The protective structure could collapse. The town would be exposed. And if we leave it, it keeps draining, I say. We're choosing between fast disaster and slow one. Neither option is safe. Nolan looks at the stone like he's trying to read the mind of whoever created it, trying to understand the motivations beneath the meticulous work. His expression is complicated. Grief, anger, betrayal, and underneath all of it, a terrible understanding. Ellery didn't do this out of malice. She did it out of love. I'll need help, he says quietly. I can't do this alone. The magical current is too strong, and I don't have the skill to manage the redirection by myself. The energy's been accumulating for months. If I try to reverse the inversion without proper support, it could explode outward through the entire binding structure. Then we do it together, I tell him, reaching out to grip his shoulder. His muscles are tense beneath my palm, rigid with the kind of stress that comes from holding impossible knowledge. But first we tell Restrepo. We tell her that Ellery didn't just poison your grandmother. She's been systematically dismantling the protection that keeps this town safe. She's made this into something planned, something bigger than one act of mercy. Nolan's grip tightens on the stone, his knuckles turning white. She was trying to save me. That's what makes this so complicated. She understood what the renewal costs. She understood the price my family pays. And she decided that price was too high, so she tried to break the system that demands it. Love and murder shouldn't exist in the same breath, I say, but even as I speak, I know it's more complicated than that. Ellery's motivations are pure and her methods are criminal, and both things are simultaneously true. We need evidence. We need documentation. We need to understand exactly how long she's been planning this. Her knowledge of the binding is comprehensive, Nolan says, looking back at the inverted stone. I've studied this magic my entire life, and she understood it faster than I did. She took the fundamentals of protective work and inverted them. She studied the ley line's flow patterns. She understood where the binding was strongest and where it was vulnerable. She didn't do this casually. She spent months preparing, maybe years. The realization settles over us like fog. The sheer dedication required for what Ellery has done. Not a crime of passion, not a moment of desperation, a methodical, precise plan, executed by someone intelligent enough to understand the magical architecture and compassionate enough to care that the renewal process kills. As we leave the grove, I feel the binding shudder, like held breath releasing and catching again. The inverted stone is still pulling, still working, still doing exactly what Ellery designed it to do, day after day, week after week, month after month. And somewhere in Crabapple Bend, maybe Ellery knows we're closing in. Maybe she can feel the investigation tightening around her. Maybe she knows that her precise plan to break the system is about to be exposed to daylight. The only question is what she'll do when cornered. Quill presses against my collarbone, his quills flat with agitation, a physical manifestation of my familiar's distress. His feeling bursts are sharp and anxious. Even Quill understands. We've found the fracture point, the place where everything could collapse. And everything depends on what happens next, on whether we can disarm the inverted wardstone safely, on whether Ellery will accept her exposure quietly or fight back with the same meticulous care she brought to her murder. The fog thickens around us as we walk back toward town. The ley line pulses uneasily, and in the spaces between heartbeats, I can feel it. The clock counting down, the binding weakening, the spring renewal approaching. We have maybe 6 months, Nolan says as we reach the edge of Brackenwood, where the magical signature fades and the ordinary world reasserts itself. The renewal happens in spring. If Ellery's successfully drained enough energy by then, the renewal ceremony might fail. The caretaker, me or Reid, might not have enough magical resource to complete the work. Then we stop her, I say. We gather evidence. We bring everything to Restrepo. We build a case so solid that the law has no choice but to act. And if that's not fast enough, Nolan asks. His voice is hollow, tired. What if she keeps working? What if she accelerates the drain once she knows we've found the stone? It's a legitimate fear. An inverted wardstone that's been pulling for months represents a significant threat. If Ellery realizes we've discovered it and decides to accelerate the draining, she could weaken the binding to the point of collapse before we have legal recourse to stop her. Then we work faster, I tell him. We gather the evidence, we present it to Restrepo, we make sure she understands the urgency, and we find a way to safely disarm the stone before Ellery can do any more damage. The walk back through Crabapple Bend feels longer than the walk out. The harbor appears slowly. First the smell of salt and seaweed, then the silhouettes of fishing boats, then the actual landscape. The town is small and familiar, and it's under threat. The binding that protects it is weakening, and we're the only people who know. The very thing Ellery was trying to prevent. Chapter 10. Reconciliation. Nolan is waiting outside the Fossick when I close up that evening, leaning against the window frame with his hands in his pockets, his posture suggesting he's been waiting long enough to make peace with the fact. 2 days have passed since we found the inverted stone in Brackenwood. 2 days of Restrepo quietly building her case, of Ellery walking around town as if she hasn't been caught, as if her methodically constructed plan hasn't crumbled like old stone. He looks exhausted in a way that sleep won't fix. His eyes have that raw quality that comes from crying without giving yourself permission to process it, from holding grief in silence while moving through ordinary tasks. "I need to explain things," he says without preamble, pushing off from the window frame. "Not an apology, an explanation. And I need you to listen without interrupting because if I lose the thread, I'm not sure I can find it again." We walk to Petrichor Coffee, even though it's past regular hours. The sky gone full dark and the streetlights casting everything in warm amber. Bee sees us through the window and opens the door without asking questions. She knows what this is. The solidarity of small towns means someone making coffee while two people figure out how to be honest with each other. Means the gift of space held by someone who cares. "The binding is a 200-year protection," Nolan says once we're settled at a corner table, wrapping his hands around the mug Bee's pressed into them. The coffee steams gently, and he seems to need the warmth more than the caffeine. "My family maintains it. We've maintained it for generations. The renewal ceremony happens every 75 years, and whoever performs it..." He stops. His throat works. His eyes close briefly. "My father died doing it. I was 17. My grandfather before him. And Ellery knew that. She knew the pattern. She knew that the renewal was coming, and she was trying to break the entire system so my family would stop having to pay that price." I reach across the small table and take his hand. His fingers are cold despite the hot coffee, and I can feel him trembling with the effort of saying these things out loud. "She poisoned Georgina because she knew the renewal ceremony was approaching," Nolan continues, his voice steady but thin. "She knew grandmother would volunteer to do it. She'd always volunteered for the hard things. And Ellery thought if she removed grandmother from the equation, if she made it look like age, like mercy, like a gentle ending instead of what it actually was, then maybe the responsibility would fall to Reid, who could refuse. Maybe the system would break. Maybe the binding would crack and no one else would have to die. Maybe the cost would finally become impossible to pay." "But it doesn't work that way," I say quietly, squeezing his hand. "No," Nolan confirms. "It falls to me. Or Reid. And one of us will have to do the renewal regardless of whether grandmother's alive or dead." Ellery created an inverted wardstone to systematically drain the binding, thinking that if she weakened it enough, the renewal would be impossible. Thinking that impossibility would force us to redesign the system entirely. Thinking that her version of mercy would save lives. The logic of it is twisted and clear all at once. Someone who cared enough to kill. Someone who studied the system thoroughly enough to understand its weak points. Someone who made a choice that seemed merciful in her mind and became murder in everyone else's reality. Bee brings us small pastries and sets them between us with the kind of care that suggests she's been listening to whispered conversations long enough to know exactly what people need. She squeezes Nolan's shoulder gently and turns away, turning the music up slightly to give us more privacy. "I'm still angry at her," Nolan says, managing a smile that's more acknowledgement than happiness. "I'm still grieving my grandmother, but I understand what drove her. And I'm terrified, Teddy, that I'm not strong enough to do the renewal properly. That I'm going to fail and everything will collapse. That I'll die like my father did and you'll be left with all of this." "You won't," I tell him, with the kind of certainty that surprises us both. "Because you're not doing it alone. That's what we're here to say. That's what all of this is about." We drink our coffee in Petrichor as the fog thickens outside, pressing against the windows like something curious. Bee's thoughtfully turned her back, organizing cups with exaggerated care. The coffee shop smells like cinnamon and possibility, the small kindnesses that communities build on, the infrastructure of caring that makes it possible for two people to be honest with each other. "I love you," Nolan says, and the words come out rough and uncertain, like he's never said them before. "I should have said it clearly instead of trying to protect you by keeping distance. I was doing to you what my family does, making decisions about what you could handle instead of letting you decide, trying to carry everything alone so you wouldn't have to bear the weight." "Fear makes people stupid," I say. "Makes them think they're protecting someone when they're actually just isolating them. But yes, you stop doing that now. I get to choose what I carry. I get to choose if I carry this." His fingers tighten around mine, and I can feel the relief moving through his entire body. "I'm afraid," he says. "I'm terrified." "Good," I tell him, and I mean it. Fear means you understand what matters. Fear means you're taking this seriously instead of pretending you can do it alone. Now we figure this out as a team. Reid's here. Desmond can help with the history and the theory. I can help with the magic. B can help with everything else. We split the burden instead of watching you carry it alone. Nolan looks at me like I've offered him something impossible. Something he's never been allowed to ask for. Something his family's history of sacrifice never taught him was permitted. "All right," he says quietly, his voice steadier now. "All right. Together then." Bea brings us fresh cups of coffee without being asked, her movements precise and caring. She's been listening from behind the counter, I realize. Of course she has. Everyone in Crabapple Bend listens. Everyone holds the stories of their neighbors in their hearts. "You did good," she tells Nolan, squeezing his shoulder again. "Coming here, being honest, that's more than a lot of people manage." Quill chirps from my shoulder, a burst of pleasure and certainty so intense that I can feel it resonating through my entire nervous system. My familiar knows what unity feels like when it actually works. When two people decide to stop protecting each other at a distance and start actually showing up for each other. When fear and love exist in the same space instead of trying to cancel each other out. "The renewal ceremony," Nolan says slowly, like he's thinking through the logistics for the first time, "requires me to channel all the binding's energy at once, to reconstruct the protective structure, to reinforce what Ellery's been systematically draining. It's dangerous work. It's killed family members before. But if we have support, if we have people who understand what's being asked, who can help hold the magical space, maybe I have a better chance." "We'll be there," I tell him. "Desmond will have research, Bea will have coffee and food, Reid will be present, I'll be present, and the entire town will understand that you're doing something necessary and hard, and we'll all be grateful for it." Nolan nods slowly, absorbing the promise of not being alone. It's written across his face how much this permission matters. How much the knowledge that help is available is already starting to shift his relationship with the burden. We sit in petrichor until Bea starts wiping down tables, until the fog outside is so thick that the streetlights barely penetrate it, until two people who were carrying everything alone realize they don't have to anymore. The coffee cools in our cups, the pastries disappear, and somewhere between arriving and leaving, we made a decision that changes everything. We choose to stop carrying weight alone. We choose to let people help. We choose to trust that the town we love will show up for us the way we would show up for them. Chapter 11. Evidence. Restrepo brings me into the interrogation room at the sheriff's office, and I understand immediately what she's asking. The room is deliberately neutral. Pale gray walls, harsh fluorescent lighting, a metal table bolted to the floor. Ellery Marsh sits at one side with her hands folded precisely in her lap, her appearance still meticulous despite the weight of what's been discovered. She's wearing the same carefully selected clothing she always does, her hair pinned neatly, her composure intact. She looks at me with the calm of someone who's made peace with being caught, who's accepted that her focused plan has crumbled. "I want you to do a reading," Restrepo says quietly from the corner where the recording equipment runs, her voice low and professional. "I want the magical evidence on record. I want the jury to understand what you find." Ellery nods slowly, and there's something almost grateful in her expression, like having her actions understood, even scientifically, even coldly, feels like validation. She extends her hand toward me without resistance, and when I touch her skin, the psychometric connection opens like a door I didn't realize was closed. The sensation is overwhelming. My nervous system flooded with information that isn't mine, emotions that don't belong to me, knowledge that I've never studied. I have to breathe through it, grounding myself in my body before I can interpret what's flowing through the contact. The reading is overwhelming in its clarity. Layers of certainty, months of research documented in her emotional signature. The binding's architecture parsed into mathematical understanding. The way ley lines flow, where protective magic concentrates, what weakens the system from within. She studied it the way an engineer studies a building, not to destroy it carelessly or out of malice, but to understand where it was vulnerable, where the stress points accumulated, where the structure could fail if someone applied pressure in exactly the right places, where sacrifice could be prevented. And underneath all of that, grief so profound it's almost unbearable. She watched Georgina weaken through the spring and summer, her movements becoming slower, her energy fading, knowing what was coming, knowing that the fall renewal would demand the life of whoever performed it, knowing that Georgina would volunteer. Ellery made a choice that seemed like salvation, like the only way to save someone she cared about from the system's merciless demand. But there's more. The hours of hand knitting, needles clicking in rhythm as hands moved with precision and purpose. The emotional weight of creating something beautiful that would slowly kill. The tears falling onto cream-colored yarn, actual tears, visible salt water staining the fibers. Ward runes traced into stitching patterns, ancient protective symbols rotated backward, their defensive purpose twisted into something that drains instead of defends. The hands that shaped that yarn, holding the inverted magical pattern in mind while needles worked fiber into form. Months of work, hands shaking from the effort. The emotional signature is the same devotion, the same certainty that she was doing something necessary. I pull my hand back, and the information settles into my bones like cold stone, heavy and aching. My heart is racing. Sweat cools on my forehead. The empathic weight of understanding exactly why she did this is almost as much as I can carry. "The shawl from Georgina's chair," Restrepo says to the recorder running steadily in the corner, her voice formal and clear. Hand-knitted by Ellery Marsh over a period of several months, with inverted ward runes woven into the stitching patterns. The shawl was worn daily by Georgina Voss, creating constant contact between the victim's skin and the embedded inverted protective magic. The psychometric reading shows Ellery's emotional signature woven into every fiber, confirmation of intentional creation and months of focused magical work. "I was saving them," Ellery says. Her voice is steady and certain. She's not denying anything. She's explaining, like the explanation will make people understand, like clarity of intention should matter. "Georgina would have died in the renewal. You know that. You all know it. The binding demands its price, and it always comes due. I just tried to shortcut the pain. I tried to make it look like mercy instead of necessity. You murdered her, Restrepo says quietly, but there's no judgment in her voice, only statement of fact. I ended suffering that was coming anyway, Ellery replies. And when that wasn't enough, I tried to break the system that demands human sacrifice from your family. The system that asks young people to carry weight that crushes them. The system that Nolan was never asked if he wanted. She looks toward the observation glass, where Nolan is watching from the other side. Her expression is almost gentle, maternal, in a way that makes the back of my neck crawl. I knew you couldn't refuse if the binding was destabilized, Ellery says, speaking directly to the place where Nolan stands. I knew you'd have to find another way. I knew you'd have to stop letting your family suffer. I was trying to give you a choice. I was trying to break the system that gives people like you no choice at all. You took my choice away, Nolan says quietly from the observation room, even though she can't hear him. The microphone doesn't pick up his voice, but I know he's saying it anyway. I know he needs the words to exist, even if Ellery never hears them. I know that understanding her motivation doesn't mean accepting her methods. The evidence we present over the next hours is methodical and damning. The shawl from Georgina's chair carrying Ellery's emotional signature woven into every fiber. The psychometric reading I conducted, the magical analysis from theoretical mages who confirm the extraordinary skill required to embed ward runes into knitted fabric. The testimony about how constant skin contact would allow inverted protective magic to work its way through Georgina's system, slowly, invisibly, looking like natural decline. The council office files documenting Ellery's research into the binding's mechanics, notes in her handwriting, diagrams showing her understanding, calculations about energy drain rates. The chemistry knowledge from her community college courses, documented in transcripts and notes. The timeline showing her access to Georgina, the visits, the gifts of hand-knitted items, the increasing frequency of contact in the months before Georgina's death. The letters she never sent, confessing her intentions in focused, measured language, sketched out in drafts found in her apartment. The knitting supplies found in her workshop, the specific yarn she used, the needles, the books about wardstone mechanics with notes in her handwriting about how to translate protective symbols into stitching patterns. By the time we're finished, the case is airtight. Ellery is competent and systematic in her evil, methodical in her mercy. She's the rare criminal who doesn't try to escape prosecution, who doesn't minimize her actions or blame circumstance, who simply accepts that her choices had consequences that extended far beyond her intention. Walking out of the sheriff's office into the gray afternoon, I feel Quill trembling against my collarbone. His quills are flat with distress. My familiar understands something fundamental. Murder is never simple. Even mercy-motivated murder leaves scars that don't heal cleanly. Even when we understand exactly why someone killed, that understanding doesn't erase the death. It doesn't undo the damage. It only makes the weight heavier. The evidence we've presented is comprehensive and damning. Restrepo will take it to the district attorney. The legal system will process it. But we all know what's going to happen. Ellery will be charged. She will stand trial. She will be convicted. And the question of whether her mercy-motivated crime deserves mercy or justice will haunt everyone who touches this case. Nolan is waiting outside the sheriff's office when I emerge into the fog. He's been standing there the whole time I was in the interrogation room, waiting to see what his psychometric reading would reveal. His expression is complicated. Grief, anger, understanding, betrayal, all layered on top of each other. His hand rubs the back of his neck in a gesture of exhaustion and distress. "She was right about the binding," he says quietly. "She was right that it cost too much. She was right that my family shouldn't have to keep paying that price with our lives. But she was wrong about how to fix it. You can't fix a broken system by breaking it further." "No," I agree. "You fix it by surviving it, by demanding better, by making sure that the next caretaker doesn't have to face what you're facing." The harbor stretches before us, calm and indifferent to human drama. The ocean doesn't care about Ellery's choice. The binding doesn't care about her motivation. The town doesn't care about her logic. All they care about is consequence. All they care about is what happens next. And what happens next is that we move forward. We gather evidence. We build a case. We let the legal system do what it's designed to do. Hold people accountable for their choices, regardless of their intentions. Chapter 12. Disarming. The inverted wardstone sits in Brackenwood like a captured demon, its surface still faintly luminous even in daylight, even now that we understand what it is. Disarming it requires more preparation than I anticipated. Nolan spends days consulting with magical theorists from Portland, comparing notes with Desmond in the archive, understanding the precise mechanics of how to reverse an inversion without triggering the energy release that would destabilize the entire binding structure and potentially bring the protective wards crashing down across all of Crabapple Bend. The problem, he tells me while we're examining records at the archive, spreading ancient texts across the wooden table that smells of old paper and dust, is that the stone's been pulling for months, extracting energy. The charge has accumulated like water behind a dam. If we simply reverse the inversion, all that accumulated power will have nowhere to go except exploding outward through the binding structure like a flood. We'd create a surge so violent it could crack the foundation. "So we don't reverse it," I say, tracing my finger along diagrams that show the flow of magical energy. "We redirect it." Desmond looks up from his historical documents, his reading glasses slipping slightly down his nose. He pushes them back up with an expression of thoughtful concentration. "You'd have to channel the energy somewhere else, somewhere it can dissipate safely. Somewhere that has the capacity to absorb a surge without being damaged." "The harbor," Nolan says slowly, and I can almost see him working through the logic in real time. "The water can absorb the surge. The ocean has always been my family's failsafe for excess magical energy. We've been discharging through the water for generations. It's stable, it's endless, and it has the natural magical capacity to handle our overflow. We spend the next week preparing, and the process is more intensive than I expect. Nolan teaches me the meditation techniques his family has used for generations, how to hold a magical current in your awareness without letting it overwhelm your nervous system, how to create a space inside yourself where energy can flow without destroying you, how to ground yourself in your physical body so that flowing power passes through you like water through a stone, rather than combusting inside you and leaving you burned out. The meditation is exhausting. We practice in the back room of the Fossick, me sitting on the worn carpet with Quill curled in my lap, Nolan guiding me through the techniques with patience that speaks to the years he spent maintaining the binding. My body aches. My head throbs from the effort of holding multiple energetic states at once. By the time we're finished with a session, I'm usually too tired to do anything except make tea and sit quietly. Reid appears at the Fossick one afternoon with maps and documentation about the ancient Voss family protocols, his arms full of leather-bound journals and hand-drawn diagrams. He's still settling into his returning home presence, still learning how to be a brother to someone he hasn't lived near in 2 decades. But his research is meticulous and thorough. His understanding of the family history is deep. "The renewal ceremony is about rebuilding the structure," Reid says, spreading out diagrams that are older than any of us, some of them predating photography, hand-drawn with careful precision. Reconstructing the magical architecture that protects the town. But disarming the inverted stone is about safely releasing what's been accumulated. They're different processes, different risks, different requirements. Can both of you do it? I ask, looking between the brothers. Or is this something that requires one family member? The renewal requires one person, Reid says, his expression settling into something complicated. Regret, maybe, or resignation. The sole caretaker has to be the conduit for the entire magical structure. But the disarming, the redirection of accumulated energy, we could share the load. The energy's coming from the ocean's natural magic anyway. It just needs channeling back to where it belongs. Nolan looks at his brother like he's offering something unexpected. Like years of absence might actually lead somewhere that isn't resentment. Like coming home might mean something besides duty and obligation. All right, Nolan says. We do this together, the way we should have done it years ago. The night we disarm the stone, the weather turns dramatically. The fog comes thicker than usual, rolling in heavily and early. The temperature drops 15 degrees in an hour. The ley line pulses visibly, almost urgently, like something aware that a threat is being removed. We gather in the Brackenwood Grove at midnight. Nolan, Reid, Desmond, myself. Quill presses against my shoulder, his quills perfectly calm. He knows we're doing something necessary. The inverted stone glows faintly as Nolan and Reid place their hands on it simultaneously, their palms flat against the cool marble. The magical work is invisible but thorough. I can feel the reversal happening, not suddenly, not with dramatic collapse, but in precise, practiced movements. The inversion begins to unwind like a knot being meticulously untied. The extracted energy starts to flow in a new direction, guided toward the harbor by Reid's practiced intention and knowledge, guided back to its source by Nolan's certainty and family authority. The surge comes at the end, a wave of magical current that tries to explode outward, that tries to shatter everything in its path. But Nolan and Reid are ready. They've been preparing for this moment. They channel it together, their combined will splitting it into pieces that the ocean can absorb without destabilizing. The process takes an hour of intense concentration. Both brothers stand with their hands pressed to the stone, their faces tight with effort, their bodies trembling from the power flowing through them. By the end, both are exhausted, their hands shaking from effort, sweat beading on their foreheads despite the cold night. The inverted stone remains intact but dormant. Its inversion unwinds completely. Its purpose is undone. Its threat to the town is neutralized. Walking back through town, I feel the binding settle differently. More stable, more certain. Like a weight that's been pressing down on the entire magical structure has finally released its grip. That wasn't so bad, Reid says, managing a tired smile that suggests he's surprised himself. I thought it would be worse. Just wait for the renewal, Nolan replies, and there's something almost warm in his tone. That's when the real work starts. But there's something different between them now. Something that 2 decades of absence hasn't completely destroyed. Something that might, eventually, become understanding. Something that might even become trust. Desmond approaches us with a blanket and thermos of hot tea. He's been watching from a distance, making sure we all made it through the work safely. That was extraordinary, he says, passing the thermos to Reid. Both of you. Coordinating energy like that. I've never seen anything like it. It only works because we're family, Reid says. Because the magic recognizes the blood connection. Someone else trying to do this would have failed, would have gotten hurt. Then you're lucky, Desmond says. but he's looking at Nolan, not Reid. To have someone who understands what you need. To have family who can step in when the burden gets too heavy. The brothers walk together toward the harbor, still supporting each other, still grounded in the work they've just completed. Nolan's arm is around Reid's shoulder, not in a gesture of support, but in a gesture of acknowledgement. They survived something difficult together. They worked magic side by side, and for the first time since Reid came back, they're not operating from a place of obligation or regret. They're operating from a place of mutual understanding. And I understand, watching them, that disarming the inverted stone wasn't just about neutralizing a magical threat. It was about two brothers learning that carrying burdens together is possible. That family doesn't have to mean isolation or sacrifice. That strength can be shared instead of shouldered alone. That love and duty can coexist without corrupting each other. The inverted stone remains in Brackenwood, inert but intact. A monument to what happened. A reminder of what Ellery tried to do. A marker of the line between intention and consequence. Chapter 13. The Arrest. Ellery Marsh is arrested on an afternoon that feels too ordinary for something so substantial. The sky is gray, but not dramatically so. The fog hasn't arrived yet. Petrichor Coffee is serving pumpkin spice lattes, and someone's dog is barking at seagulls near the harbor. Everything is normal and mundane until Restrepo arrives at the council office with two deputies, and the moment Ellery sees them, she stands up with the calm of someone who's been expecting this, who's made peace with it, who's understood for weeks that this is how the story ends. "I'm ready," she says, her voice steady, and she holds out her wrists like she's been rehearsing this moment, preparing for it the way she prepared for everything else in her deliberate, methodical life. She doesn't resist. She doesn't try to bargain or explain. She simply accepts, and there's something almost peaceful in her acceptance. The town learns about it at Petrichor Coffee, where B hears it first from Restrepo's deputy and tells everyone else in that particular way that small towns process major information. Within an hour, everyone knows. Ellery Marsh murdered Georgina Voss. Ellery Marsh created an inverted wardstone to systematically drain the binding. Ellery Marsh was caught and arrested and is awaiting trial. By evening, the knowledge has crystallized into the kind of certainty that's impossible to undo. I attend the formal arraignment, watching from the gallery as Ellery stands before the judge in a courtroom that smells like old wood and older decisions, like every verdict that's ever been rendered in this space. The judge sits elevated on the bench, her bearing suggesting she's seen worse and better, that nothing surprises her anymore. Ellery is dressed with careful attention to detail in neutral clothes that suggest she understands the performance element of courtroom appearance. She stands with impeccable posture, her hands folded, her expression composed. She pleads not guilty, which surprises me, until her lawyer explains that the defense will be necessity, that she acted to prevent greater harm, that her intentions were merciful even if her methods were criminal. That the binding renewal has always been a death sentence, and that Ellery was aware of this fact. "The binding renewal kills," her lawyer says, his voice carrying the weight of prepared argument. The defendant was aware that Ms. Voss would have suffered considerably through the ceremony, and possibly died from performing it. She attempted to prevent that outcome through alternative means. The judge makes notes. Her expression remains neutral. "While we do not defend the defendant's methods," the lawyer continues, "we argue that they emerge from a sincere desire to prevent greater suffering. This is a classic necessity defense. The defendant believed, reasonably, that her actions would prevent a greater harm." It's a compelling argument. It's also unlikely to succeed against the evidence of poison and deliberate magical sabotage, but it will make the trial harder. It will require people to articulate why mercy-motivated murder is still murder, why intention doesn't erase consequence, why the law has to function independent of individual moral certainty. After the arraignment, I find myself standing in the Fossick, staring at the inventory without actually seeing it. The shelves blur together, amethyst points and rose quartz tumbles and deliberately labeled jars of dried herbs. Quill emerges from the back room with a questioning chirp, his quills shifting with concern. I understand why she did it, I tell my familiar, running my fingers along a shelf of tarot cards. That's the problem. I understand the logic. I understand the care behind it. I understand what drove her to study the binding so deliberately, to understand its vulnerabilities, to attempt an impossible solution. And I still think she was wrong. The binding doesn't go away just because the caretaker is murdered. The magical system doesn't dissolve because one person decided the cost was too high. All Ellery accomplished was adding another death to the ledger. Another weight that Nolan will have to carry through the renewal ceremony. Another layer of grief on top of the grief he's already carrying. But I go to visit her in custody once, bringing coffee from petrichor that B insisted on donating. She'll want to see a friendly face, B said, pressing the cup into my hands. Even if she shouldn't have done what she did. Even if she made terrible choices, she's still a person. Ellery sits across from me in the visitation room behind bulletproof glass, and she looks smaller somehow, less certain. The interrogation process and the reality of arrest have worn away some of her certainty without eroding her conviction. She picks up the phone on her side of the barrier and waits for me to pick up mine. "Do you understand why I did it?" she asks. The question is direct, almost desperate, like understanding would somehow validate the choice. "Yes," I say. "That's why I'm still angry." Ellery nods slowly, accepting the truth of it. "Fair. Your certainty was beautiful," I continue, and I mean it. The way you understood the binding, the way you parsed its architecture, the way you cared about preventing suffering, that part was genuine and good. Your love for Georgina, that was real. But you made a choice that's going to haunt you forever, and it didn't accomplish what you wanted. The binding's still here. Nolan still has to perform the renewal, and now he gets to grieve his grandmother while carrying the added weight of knowing someone killed her trying to save him. "I know," Ellery says quietly. She wraps her hands around the phone, and I can see her trembling. That realization is why I'm not fighting this. Not really. I made a choice. I understood the risk. I did it anyway. Now I live with it. Walking out of the holding cell, I feel hollowed out. Not by the visit itself, but by the fact that Ellery is a person I could understand, could sympathize with, and who still committed an unforgivable act. The world doesn't divide neatly into good people and bad people. It divides into people making choices, some of which are catastrophic regardless of their intentions. It divides into people trying to help and accidentally hurting. It divides into the terrible gray space where love and harm occupy the same moment. Nolan is waiting for me in the hallway outside the visitation area. He's been waiting there the entire time I was talking to Ellery, holding space for whatever I was feeling. He doesn't ask what we discussed. He just pulls me into an embrace and lets me stand there, letting the emotional weight of understanding Ellery settle on me and through me and eventually pass. "I'm sorry she did this," he says quietly into my hair. "I'm sorry you had to feel her certainty. I'm sorry we have to hold all of this. the understanding and the anger and the grief and the knowledge that she was trying to help. "I'm sorry too," I tell him. "I'm sorry that your grandmother died. I'm sorry that Ellery thought the only way to save you was to poison Georgina. I'm sorry that we live in a world where these are the choices people have to make." The hallway is cold and clinical. The holding area smells like institutional cleaning products and human desperation. This is not a place designed for mercy or understanding. This is a place designed for consequence. The trial is scheduled for late October. Until then, Ellery Marsh will wait in custody, her certainty slowly transforming into something that looks like acceptance. And the town will process what it means that someone they knew, someone they worked with, someone who cared deeply about their community, became a murderer, when that community demanded too much of one family. The binding renews in spring. The countdown begins. The weight presses down, and Ellery waits in her cell, understanding finally what her choices have cost everyone: Georgina, Nolan, Reid, the town, and most of all, herself. Chapter 14. Trial. The trial is held in a courthouse 20 minutes outside Crabapple Bend, in a county seat with the kind of official architecture that suggests justice happens in serious buildings with high ceilings and the weight of precedent. The courtroom is paneled in dark wood that's been polished by decades of legal proceedings. The judge's bench looms at one end. The jury box sits to the side, populated by citizens who've agreed to set aside their personal connections and consider only the evidence. Ellery sits at the defense table with her lawyer, composed and considered, still precise in her appearance despite the Orange County jumpsuit that's meant to erase personality and reduce her to suspect. She sits with impeccable posture, her hands folded, her expression composed like she's decided that dignity is the only thing she has left to control. The prosecution's case is straightforward and methodical. Poison through magical means. Access. Motive, though they argue it consideredly, not evil motive, but motive nonetheless. The shawl, with Ellery's emotional signature woven into every fiber, presented to the court with expert testimony about psychometric reading and the complexity of embedding ward runes into knitting patterns. The correspondence found in her apartment documenting her intentions in considered, measured language. The chemistry knowledge from community college courses. The timeline placing her at Georgina's house repeatedly during the months of the shawl's creation and Georgina's slow decline. A schedule that shows her visiting Georgina with increasing frequency in the weeks before Georgina's death. The knitting supplies found in her workshop, the specific yarn, the needles, the reference books about wardstone mechanics marked up with her notes about translating protective symbols into stitching patterns. What makes it harder is that Ellery's lawyer is competent, and the necessity defense has actual weight, actual legal precedent, actual philosophical standing. She presents expert testimony about the binding renewal process, about how it has historically resulted in the death or permanent incapacitation of the caretaker, about how Ellery, in her careful research, would have known this, would have understood what was coming for Georgina. "My client," the lawyer says in her opening statement, her voice carrying the weight of prepared argument, "made an impossible choice in an impossible situation. She was attempting to prevent the death of a woman she cared about deeply. The method was criminal, but the intention was mercy. The motivation was love." The courtroom is silent. Some jurors are taking notes. Others are watching Ellery. "While we do not defend the defendant's methods," the lawyer continues, "we argue that they emerge from a sincere desire to prevent greater suffering. This is a classic necessity defense. The defendant believed, reasonably, that her actions would prevent a greater harm. Preventing the death of Georgina Voss was her stated goal. In her mind, She was saving a life. She spent months hand-knitting a shawl, yes, but she did so as an act of love, not violence. The ward runes she wove into the fibers were meant to gently end Georgina's suffering before the binding renewal could demand its brutal price. The prosecution counters with something harder to argue against. Intent is not permission. Understanding the cost of the binding doesn't justify murder. Mercy-motivated crime is still crime, still deserves justice, still requires the legal system to respond with clarity and precedent. Otherwise, anyone could justify anything if their motivation was pure enough. And the systematic nature of the crime, months of careful preparation, the creation of a weapon disguised as a gift, the intimate knowledge required to understand that Georgina would wear the shawl every single day. That's not a moment of desperation. That's methodical, calculated murder. I testify about the psychometric readings I've conducted, about the emotional signatures in the shawl Ellery wove with her own hands, the care present in her work, alongside the certainty that she was right to act, about how understanding someone's motivations doesn't require forgiving their actions, about how magic carries emotional memory, and in Ellery's case, that memory shows love and grief and tears woven into fiber, and absolute conviction that she was preventing suffering. About how I felt months of accumulated magical intention embedded in the stitching patterns, not a moment of impulse, but sustained dedication to creating a weapon that would slowly drain Georgina's life force while looking like natural aging. Reid testifies about what his family's burden actually costs, about watching his grandfather deteriorate through the renewal ceremony, about understanding why someone might want to break the system that demands such sacrifice from young people, about how he ran away partly because he was terrified of inheriting this burden, and how that terror led him to understand what drove Ellery. But he also testifies about how understanding doesn't excuse the choice to murder, how system change doesn't come through individual acts of violence, however well-intentioned. Nolan doesn't testify. Restrepo advised against it. His emotional connection to the victim and to the defendant would complicate the case more than it would clarify it. His presence in the courtroom is enough. People see him, see the weight he's carrying, understand what the binding renewal means for someone like him. They see him gripping the railing of the observation section so hard his hands are white-knuckled, his breath held in the kind of stillness that suggests he's barely maintaining control, while his former family friend is convicted. The trial lasts 3 weeks. Witnesses come and go. Evidence is presented methodically. Arguments are made and countered. The judge sits with the bearing of someone who understands that there are no good outcomes here, only necessary ones. That justice is about holding people accountable, even when their motivations are understandable. That the law has to exist independent of individual moral certainty, or it becomes nothing but the personal judgment of whoever has the most conviction. In the end, the jury finds Ellery guilty of murder in the first degree. The deliberation takes 6 hours. When they return, their expression suggests they've wrestled with the decision, that they understand the complexity, that they're not satisfied with the outcome, but believe it's necessary. The sentencing is handled with the kind of quiet that suggests even the judge wishes this situation had resolved differently. Ellery stands before the bench, composed and accepting, while the judge considers the evidence and the law and the weight of what Ellery has done. "Ms. Marsh," the judge says, her voice considered and measured, "you committed a serious crime. The murder of Georgina Voss through the systematic creation of an enchanted object designed to drain her life force over months of constant contact. The systematic attempt to destabilize a magical protection that safeguards an entire town. However, this court acknowledges the unusual circumstances of this case. Your genuine care for Ms. Voss, your motivation to prevent suffering, your meticulous planning and craftsmanship, and your lack of prior criminal history. The judge pauses. She's choosing her words consideredly. You receive a 20-year sentence, she says finally. This will likely mean you serve 15 years before being eligible for parole, assuming good behavior and a willingness to process what you've done. The length of this sentence reflects both the seriousness of your crime and the complexity of your motivation. 20 years is long enough for Ellery to truly understand the consequences. Not so long that it erases her life entirely. It's the compromise that the legal system offers for the impossible intersection of intention and action. After the verdict, Ellery looks at Nolan one more time across the courtroom. There's no apology in her gaze, no regret for the attempt itself. There's only the weight of someone who acted according to her values and now has to accept that her values were insufficient justification for her methods. Walking out of the courthouse, Nolan takes my hand. His grip is tight, like he's grounding himself in something solid and present and real. He releases it slowly as we reach the courthouse steps, and I can feel the tremor in his hand, the physical manifestation of everything he's been holding together. Is it justice? He asks. The question carries the weight of months of processing, of trying to understand how the law responds to mercy-motivated crime. It's the closest thing we have, I tell him. She's alive, so she can eventually come to terms with what she did. She's imprisoned, so the town is protected from her certainty. She'll have time to understand the damage she caused. She'll have time to think about what love looks like when it's separated from harm. It's not perfect, but it's honest. We stand in the courthouse hallway for a long moment, both of us processing what the legal system has decided. Ellery will serve time. Ellery will face consequences. But Ellery will also have the opportunity to eventually heal, to eventually understand what she's done, to eventually, potentially, rejoin the world as a different person. The drive back to Crabapple Bend is quiet. The fall is turning harder now, the leaves red and gold and letting go. The season of change is accelerating, and somewhere in the spring ahead, Nolan will have to face the binding renewal, with Ellery's attempt at prevention now transformed into completed consequence. The weight of the town settles on his shoulders more visibly as we approach the harbor. His breath held, until we reach the edge of town, and he releases it slowly. Not relief, just the acknowledgement that the legal process is finished and the harder work is beginning. But this time, he's not carrying it alone. My hand is in his. Desmond will be waiting. Bee will have coffee ready. Reid will arrive soon. And the entire town will hold the space for him to do something impossible. That's enough. That's more than enough. Chapter 15. Reid's choice. Reid is packing his truck on an afternoon in November when I find him at the harbor. The truck is loaded with books, research material from the archives, historical documents about the binding, personal items he's accumulated over the months since coming back. He's methodical about it, deliberate not to crush anything fragile. Each box is labeled in his precise handwriting. Each book is handled with the kind of gentleness that suggests these items matter to him. You're leaving, I say. It's not a question. I've known for a week that this was coming. Nolan mentioned it deliberately, like he was testing whether the words would break me. They didn't, but they've been sitting heavy in my chest since then. I'm thinking about it, Reid replies. He sets down a box labeled Family History with the kind of care that suggests these items, these records of his family's burden, his family's sacrifice, matter to him in ways he's still learning to articulate. I came back to help with grandmother, to help Nolan understand that the burden doesn't have to be carried alone, to be present for the investigation and the trial. And I did those things, but I'm still the person who ran away. And staying here feels like I'm waiting for everyone to need something from me again, and I'm not sure I'm ready for that. Nolan appears from the harbor master's office, watching his brother work. There's a tightness around his eyes that suggests this conversation has already happened between them. This decision has already been made and accepted and processed privately before being shared with the rest of us. B wanted me to bring you both coffee, I say, handing over cups that I'd prepared at Petrichor before coming here. She'd anticipated this moment somehow. Small-town intuition or familiar communication I haven't quite learned yet. She also sent those pastries you like, the ones with the chocolate. Reid accepts the coffee gratefully, wrapping his hands around the warm cup like he needs the comfort of it. The three of us stand at the harbor's edge, where the water moves with the invisible current of Nolan's deliberate, magical maintenance. The harbor is Nolan's responsibility. The ocean is the place where excess magical energy gets safely dissipated. The water has always been his family's failsafe, their release valve for the weight they carry. I thought about staying, Reid says quietly, his voice carrying the weight of months of consideration. I spent weeks thinking about staying. Thought about taking a job here, building a life, being present for the renewal ceremony next spring. Being there when my brother faces the thing that killed our father and grandfather. Thought about martyring myself on the altar of family obligation. But, Nolan prompts gently. But I think that's not honesty, Reid replies. I think that's martyrdom dressed up as redemption. I ran away because the binding's burden scared me. I spent 20 years running away. I haven't actually processed whether I'm ready to stop running, or whether I'm just trying to make up for lost time by sacrificing myself. And that's not fair to you. That's not fair to this town. That's not fair to myself. He looks at his brother like he's waiting for permission to leave. Like family abandonment is only forgivable if it's explicitly authorized by the person being abandoned. So you're going, Nolan says. Not accusatory, just factual, accepting. I'm going somewhere to figure out what I want without the weight of family obligation in the room, Reid replies. Maybe Portland, maybe somewhere further. Maybe I come back, maybe I don't. But either way, I need it to be my choice, not something I feel obligated to do, not something I'm doing to atone for 20 years of absence. He takes a sip of coffee, and I watch him steady himself with the warmth of it. I know what it cost me to run away, Reid continues. I know what it cost Nolan to stay. I know that coming back was supposed to fix something, but I'm not sure it fixed anything except my understanding of what I was running from. And maybe that understanding needs more time than a few months. Maybe I need to sit with it somewhere else before I can come back here and be useful instead of just present. I watch the brothers understand each other across a gulf that 20 years created, but that a few months of genuine conversation is beginning to bridge. Reid won't stay. But his leaving is different now. It's not running from the binding's burden. It's not abandonment. It's an honest admission that he's not ready to carry it, and that matters. That honesty matters more than obligation. After Reid finishes loading his truck, checking the boxes once, twice, 3 times to make sure nothing will shift during the drive, we go to Petrichor Coffee for one final gathering. B has prepared something special. Pastries from the bakery in the next town over, the expensive kind she reserves for important moments and significant departures. Desmond joins us, bringing a wrapped parcel of research materials for Reid's journey. Books about the binding, historical documents, notes he's compiled. Restrepo stops by on her afternoon patrol to say goodbye to a man who came back as a suspect and left as something more complicated. Someone the town will hold in its collective heart, even as he leaves. The coffee shop is warm and familiar. The fog hasn't arrived yet, but it's waiting outside the windows, accumulating. Bee sets out extra pastries, and Reid eats like he's storing up the taste of this place, like he's trying to memorize it for the long drive ahead. "Come back whenever you're ready," Nolan tells his brother. "Come back for the next renewal ceremony if you want. Come back just to visit. And if you never come back, that's okay too. But you know the door's open. You know you're welcome." Reid grips his brother's shoulder, and there's something in the gesture that suggests understanding is possible even across distance. That family doesn't have to mean obligation. That love can exist independent of proximity. Reid drives away at dusk, his truck disappearing toward the highway that leads beyond Crabapple Bend, toward Portland and distance, and whatever healing looks like for someone who spent 20 years running. The town settles back into its smaller circle. People who are staying. People who've committed to carry the weight together. That night, Nolan and I sit in the Fossick after closing, the lights dimmed low, the tea already cooling in our cups. He tells me what he's afraid of. The renewal ceremony coming up in spring. The possibility that his strength won't be sufficient. The fear that he's inherited a burden that's already killed 2 family members, and he might become the 3rd. The weight of carrying a protection spell that was never designed to rest on young shoulders. "What if I fail?" he asks. It's the question underneath everything. The core fear that's been driving him toward isolation, that's been making him pull away from people, that's been making him believe he has to carry this alone. "Then we deal with it together," I tell him. I reach across the table and take his hand. "We don't get to choose whether the binding demands renewal. We only get to choose how we face it. And you're not facing it alone." Quill chirps softly from his bed in the corner of the shop, his approval settled in the warmth of the familiar space. My familiar knows that some promises matter more than others. Some commitments are real not because they're easy, but because they're made with full awareness of what they'll cost. The spring renewal is 4 months away. Reid is somewhere on a highway deciding who he wants to become, deciding whether family is something you're born into or something you choose. Ellery is in prison processing the consequences of her choices, learning slowly what it means to be certain and wrong. And Nolan is here, held by this small town, held by people who love him, preparing for the most difficult work his family has ever asked him to do. He's not carrying it alone anymore. And that changes everything. Chapter 16. Brave. The binding renewal happens in spring. In the quiet hours between midnight and dawn, when the ley line pulses strongest and the magical current of Crabapple Bend flows most visibly. The harbor at this hour feels separate from the rest of the world, a liminal space where magic and ordinary reality intersect. I watch from the ritual space Nolan has prepared, not a formal chamber, but the harbor at high tide, where the ocean meets the town's magical structure and the exchange happens most naturally. The water is dark, reflecting the stars and the terrible clarity of knowing what's being asked. Nolan stands at the water's edge with his hands extended, and I can see him holding the entire binding in his awareness. 200 years of protective magic, sustained by his family's sacrifice, now requiring reconstruction by someone who's terrified he isn't strong enough. The work is invisible to most people, but I can feel it. The way magic responds to his intention, the way the binding acknowledges his claim to caretaker authority. His connection to the magical current is so deep that his physical body seems to fade into the background. He's barely aware of the water around him, barely aware of breathing, barely aware of anything except the vast structure he's holding in his mind. It takes 6 hours. 6 hours of standing in the cold water, 6 hours of channeling power through his body, 6 hours of holding a protection spell that was never designed to rest on young shoulders. By the end, Nolan is shaking, his connection to the magical current so deep that he's barely aware of his physical body anymore. His skin is pale, his lips are blue. His eyes have rolled back slightly, showing mostly white. I've never seen anyone look so close to death while still remaining technically alive. I support him as he comes back to ordinary consciousness, wrapping blankets around him, pressing warm coffee into his hands. Desmond is here, and Bee, and half the town watching from respectful distance as a young man faces the thing that killed his grandfather, faces the thing that killed his father, and survives it. They're far enough away to give him space, but close enough to bear witness, close enough to hold him up if he falls. When Nolan opens his eyes and looks at me, they're different somehow. Older, more aware of what he carries, but not broken, not destroyed by it, not the way his father was destroyed, not the way his grandfather was destroyed. He opens his eyes and sees me, sees the town, sees the dawn breaking over the harbor. I survived, he says, like he's confirming it for himself, like he needs to speak it into existence to make it real. His voice is thin and hollow, but unmistakably alive. You did, I tell him. I kiss his forehead. I wrap him in another blanket. You were brave. The renewal doesn't happen again for 75 years. By then, Nolan will have trained someone to carry the responsibility. By then, maybe the system will have changed. Maybe his family will have found a way to distribute the burden instead of concentrating it. Maybe the cost will be something other than approaching death. Maybe Ellery's attempt to break the system will have inspired a generation of people to do what she tried to do, to refuse to accept that human sacrifice is necessary, to demand that magic find another way to sustain itself. But that's a future problem. Today, Nolan survived. Today, the binding is renewed and reinforced. Today, Crabapple Bend is protected for another generation. Today is enough. The town celebrates quietly but genuinely. Petrichor Coffee serves free pastries for a week, and customers are instructed to take 2 and tell Bee what they mean to Nolan. She collects the stories in a leather journal, documenting what this town thinks about the young man who carried their protection. Bee's sugar glider, Confetti, is particularly pleased with the extra treats and spends the week looking smugly content. The fog rolls in at dusk, precise and dependable, returning to its normal schedule now that the magical disturbance has been resolved. The wards in the town square stop flickering. The ley line settles into steady rhythm, no longer pulsing with irregular urgency. The protection that Ellery tried to dismantle is now stronger than before. Nolan recovers slowly. It takes a week for him to stop shaking. It takes 2 weeks before he can walk without support. It takes a month before he can work a full shift at the harbor without needing to sit down halfway through. But he recovers. He survives. He's not his father. He's not his grandfather. He's something new. Something they built him to be, something the town helped him become, something that honors their sacrifice without repeating it. In late spring, a letter arrives from Reid. It's postmarked from Portland, and his handwriting is meticulous and deliberate, the penmanship of someone taking time with his words. I'm staying in the city for now, the letter says. I'm working at a library, which feels like I should have done this years ago. The books here are incredible. I've been reading about what the binding actually costs, and I understand now why Ellery did what she did. Not forgive, understand. She was right that the system is unfair. She was wrong that murder fixes it. I'm not ready to come back to Crabapple Bend yet, but I'm thinking about it. And one day, I think I'll be ready to help Nolan carry the burden, not because I have to, but because I want to. Because being family means more than running away or staying out of obligation. Because some people are worth coming home for. Tell Nolan I'm proud of him. Tell Desmond thank you for the research materials. They've been invaluable. Tell Bea her coffee is already missed, and I'm thinking about learning to make it myself. Tell Teddy that she's good for my brother, and he's lucky to have found someone willing to carry this weight with him. The letter closes with something that sounds like hope. Reid isn't coming back yet, but he's not running anymore. He's thinking. He's reading. He's working. He's healing. Summer comes to Crabapple Bend again, with tourists and seasonal rhythm and all the ordinary chaos that follows Renewal. The harbor grows busy with fishing boats and pleasure cruisers. Petrichor coffee is crowded every afternoon. The Fossick receives shipments of new crystals and herbs. Life returns to its comfortable pace, the rhythm of a small town that survived something difficult and emerged stronger. I'm at the Fossick on an afternoon when Quill suddenly lifts his head, his quills trembling with feeling bursts so intense that I set down my work immediately. He knows before I know. He feels the presence before I see it. Nolan comes through the door with the kind of presence that suggests he's been carrying something all day and just released it. He looks lighter somehow, freer. There's color back in his cheeks. His eyes have returned to their normal darkness. The harbor stable, he tells me. He sits at the counter like he's done this 1,000 times before, like he's a regular customer instead of someone who just survived the most difficult magical working of his life. The magical current is flowing smoothly. The ley line is steady. The town is protected. And I'm still alive to feel the sun warming my face in the afternoon. He smiles. And it's genuine. Not forced. Not the performance of someone trying to convince people he's okay. Actually, genuinely happy to be alive. I didn't think I'd feel that again, he says. I thought doing the renewal would change me somehow, make me into something sacrificial. But I'm still me. I'm still tired and I'm still scared sometimes, but I'm still alive and present and here. You're brave, I tell him. You did something terrifying, and you survived it. We did, he corrects. He reaches across the counter and takes my hand. His grip is warm and solid. We survived it. You were there. Desmond was there. Bea made coffee that tasted like love. The entire town held the space for me to do something impossible. That's the only way I could have survived it, by not being alone. That evening, we sit on the seawall while the fog thickens around us. Quill is curled in my lap, purring in his small hedgehog way. Nolan has his arm around my shoulders, and the harbor moves with the invisible current of his family's meticulous magical maintenance. The town is safe. The burden is shared. The future is unknown, but not terrifying anymore. It's just the future, waiting to be discovered. Book 5 is going to be complicated, Nolan says softly. Ellery's going to be released eventually. Reid's going to come back. And there's going to be other murders, other investigations, other ways that this town challenges people to be brave. I know, I say. But we handle it together. That's the deal we made. The fog rolls in, precise and beautiful. And Crabapple Bend settles into the kind of peace that only comes after weathering the worst and finding you're still standing. The weight hasn't disappeared. It's just been distributed. It's been shared. It's been transformed from something unbearable into something we can carry together. The Fossick Lane mysteries are nowhere near finished. There will be more deaths, more investigations, more ways that this small town tests the people who love it. But for tonight, in this moment, there's only the harbor and the love of people who chose to stay. And that's enough. That's more than enough.
Thank you for listening. Please visit me at winvalentine.com to stay up to date. Please subscribe, leave a comment, and review.